So if I can just ask anyone who, I can see everybody's muted, so that's great. If everyone apart from our first speaker can mute, I'm just letting people into the room now, so that's great. And we will be beginning this event literally within the next 30 seconds. So good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are in the world, and welcome to one of our regular but different Friday morning infrastructure intelligence events. My name is Andy Walker. I'm the editor of Infrastructure Intelligence, and I will be chairing today's online conference on a big issue, a massive issue for our sector. And that issue is one of social value. We're really delighted to be holding this event today in association with our strategic partners, the Communications and Public Affairs Consultancy, BECG. And my mind goes back to last year when we were having various conversations with BECG and some of their key people about different things going on in the industry. And one issue kept coming up over and over again, and it really is a recurring issue as well that has been raised on many of our regular webinars that we've been holding over the last year as we've all been under lockdown conditions, and that is the value that the infrastructure and construction sector brings to society. Social value keeps coming up over and over again, and so we thought that it would be a good idea to actually have an event on this particular issue, and we've assembled a pretty decent range of speakers, I have to say, who will be coming at this topic from a range of directions. We'll be looking at the government's new social value policy for procurement. We'll be taking a bit of a deep dive into what is social value, what does it really mean, how do you measure it, can you measure it? And then we'll also look at some of the best practice demonstrations of social value across our construction and infrastructure sector. As always, with our events, if you have any questions for any of our panelists, any of our speakers, then please do post them in the chat and we'll do our level best to get to them. This is a slightly different event to ones that we've organized previously because we've got two panels later on the agenda and also a speaker at the beginning. So don't be too nervous if you see people popping up on the screen. That'll just be them arriving into the virtual room. So without further ado, we're going to kick off with someone who's going to talk to us about the government's new social value policy for procurement, and that someone is Samantha Butler, who is head of social value and skills at the Cabinet Office, where she's playing a key role in expanding the use of social value across government. And the government, as we all know, have really placed a high level on social value. Boris Johnson's build, build, build and build back better mantra that we've heard repeatedly over the recent period certainly points us in a particular direction, that the government want to see real value in the projects that are procured and ultimately delivered by the construction and infrastructure sector. And obviously government is a major client of this sector and indeed the whole of business, influencing well over £50 billion worth of procurement on a range of goods, services and works. We're really fortunate to have Samantha talking to us today about the government's new social value policy for our procurement. Samantha's got a background in commercial strategy and policy, including working in a number of FTSE 100 companies and also public sector organisations. And as I say, she'll talk to us today about the government's new social value policy for procurement and what that means for all of those that work with it and around it. So Samantha, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. Thank you for that great introduction. And I think it's great to see so many people interested in this topic now. What I'm going to do is start by asking you a question, please, to give me a feel for who we have in our virtual room today. So if in the chat function you could put a Y for yes, please, if you have already included social value in a bid to government contracts, please. Fantastic. Got quite a few coming through there. Look at that, lots of people already. So that's really useful to me, thank you. And also I'm going to ask another question now. So how many of you, when we were walking about and commuting, were regularly taking something like a Keep Cup with you to buy your tea and coffee? Let's have another show of hands by using yes in the comments there. Fantastic. Yes. And why are we doing that? We're doing that because we're buying it in a way, I think many of us, yes, you can get money off a coffee, but you can also, you're reducing the impact and use of single-use plastics and the many reasons why we do that. Essentially, we're making a procurement decision, a purchasing decision in a way that is in minimizing our impact on the environment, bringing these additional benefits with our purchase. I happen to be wearing a pair of spectacles that when I bought them, a pair was given to somebody in need. Many of us are now making those decisions in a way that brings additional benefits. And essentially, that's what we're doing with the government expenditure. We're making every pound work as hard as it possibly can for our communities and for the reasons that Andy's just spoken about. So that is translated into a new policy note that I'm sure you're aware of that we call Procurement Policy Note 0620. And I'm going to tell you more about that policy note. We call it PPN 0620. What's changing? The new approach, as you probably also know, there is a tool associated with that. And all the materials are already available on gov.uk for you to prepare as well as at the same time as staff are. So we can share those today as well. And we'll talk about how the tool works and the resources that are available for your staff to prepare your organisation. So I'm just going to step back and reflect on the legislation. Public Services Social Value Act 2012, to give it its full title, as you know, is for the contracts for the provision of services and services together with the purchase or hire of goods or carrying out of works. And the requirement for public authorities is to consider how they might act to improve the social, economic and environmental well-being of the relevant area. Also how they might act with a view to securing that improvement, and also to consider whether to consult. So that's the underpinning legislation for contracts for the provision of services. So what's changing then? Well, first of all, it's that scope. So in June 2018, the then Chancellor for the Duchy of Lancaster, David Linton, made an announcement including these 4 commitments. First of all, the scope. So in central government and arm's length bodies, so that's executive agencies and non-departmental bodies, so lots of organisations, there will be a change to the scope. So first of all, it won't be just services contracts, it will be goods, works and services over the public contracts regulations threshold. So the public contracts regulations, or the PCRs, as I'll continue to call them. Secondly, it won't be to just consider, it will be to evaluate social value. It will be mandatory to include social value questions from tenders. There are 3 exceptions to be used in rare cases. Thirdly, currently there's no central reporting on social value. There will be central reporting to Cabinet Office on government's most important contracts, the largest contracts. Some of you may be familiar with those being called gold contracts or category A contracts in some departments. And finally, a commitment to mandatory training for commercial staff. So that's around 4,000 staff across government. Now, it's worth mentioning, as we're talking about the number of staff, there are around 30,000 contract managers across government. So it starts to give you a feel for the size and impact of this programme. So every government department, every arm's length body, and therefore every market in which we're operating. So a large, complex change programme. So how did the team go about translating that commitment into the policy note? Well, it was a joint team that came together between the Department of Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, who look after or have the responsibility for, I should say, the Social Value Act, and Cabinet Office, who have responsibility for commercial policy. And of course, first of all, they listened. There were lots of workshops, both with staff who are going to implement this across government, but also workshops and interviews with representatives of supplier industry bodies, exemplars from both central government and wider public sector, and social value measurement experts, etc. And you may also, some of you can be familiar with the public consultation that was held once the initial approach was outlined. Using all of the feedback from that listening exercise, a number of design principles were formed, and I'm going to share those with you because they really do shape the nature of the approach that government has taken. The first, both from suppliers but particularly from staff, was to minimise the change management aspect of this, not to add additional burdens to the procurement process. So there was a request to use existing processes wherever possible. So that's the first design principle. The second, from the supply market particularly, was, no surprise really, to provide consistency from suppliers, whether you're supplying into DWP, Ministry of Justice, Ministry of Defence, etc., to have a consistent approach and a consistent way of measuring social value. And that is what led us to go further than translating the commitment into the policy statement, into developing a tool that goes with that. Next, it was to not stifle further reaches for social value. Some teams were already working in markets that are mature in social value and themselves have a mature understanding of social value and may want to go further than some of the minimum requirements that we have in the policy note. There are no barriers to doing that, and more mature teams can reach higher, greater weightings, for example. And finally, this programme, the commitments, were made in response to the recommendations of the outsourcing review to further diversify government supply chains. So the final really important design principle was to prevent creating new barriers to entry for small and medium-sized enterprises and voluntary community and social enterprises. The approach needed to be flexible enough to allow different sizes and types of organisations all to contribute on a fair and level playing field. So that led to an approach that really focuses on outcomes and outputs to enable that flexibility, and also to focus on the quality of the approach, that promises made are promises delivered. So very much about the quality of the approach, what it can do, how it meets the outcome that we're seeking, and then how well robust is the implementation plan. And it was also that request for simplification, consistency, really also led to a requirement to focus on 5 social value priorities. So those are very much an expression of government's commitment to social value and what social value means to government. So there are 5 themes, and each of those has one or more specific outcomes, and there are 8 outcomes. What I'm just going to do now is just share something on screen with you, so just bear with me while I do that. And I'm just going to outline what we have in the new model. So I said that we have the policy statement, and then we have a social value model. And this essentially is what it contains. If you imagine it like a large grid, we have these 5 sections to it. So first of all, there are those 5 themes, social value themes and priorities for government, 8 policy outcomes. And then remember we said that we'd use existing processes wherever possible. Now, many of you said that you're already working with government there. You'll be very familiar that there are typically 2 portfolios of questions, the cost portfolio and the quality portfolio. And the quality portfolio will ask a question, expect you to write a method statement describing what you will do. Those questions, of course, are in the tender document, but so also are award criteria. Government has to be explicit about the award criteria and any sub-criteria that are being used to evaluate and score your bids. It's exactly the same process, and it's that qualitative evaluation, that existing process, that will be used to score social value too. So there won't be separate sections in that way. It will be part of the quality evaluation using exactly the same types of questions and scoring mechanisms. There will typically be 3 parts to the questions. What will you commit to? And that will, of course, form part of your contractual commitment. How will you deliver it and how does it meet the outcome? And what is your implementation plan? And the award criteria are focused on the how and the implementation plan, the quality of how it meets the outcome, the approach that you're taking, and the implementation plan. We're not scoring 100 apprenticeships better than 50 apprenticeships. And that is deliberately a decision made based on the diversity criteria, not creating barriers to entry for different sizes and types of organisations. It's been mandatory now for tenders advertised from the 1st of January under the Public Contracts Regulations. From the 1st of June, that will be for the Defence and Public Contracts Regulations too. There'll be a minimum 10% weighting of the total score, not just the quality score, but the total score. And departments will decide on an appropriate compliance and contract management principles. This is about empowering departments to use the tool in a consistent way, but as appropriate for their markets and the needs. And of course, we are still operating under the Public Contracts Regulations. And that means that we also need to always ensure that requirements are meeting relevance, and they are relevant and proportionate to the subject matter of the contract. So this is where the consistency aids us too. So essentially, what else is in the model are these 3 other categories you can see on screen here. So first of all, there's a menu of model questions. They're model because, as I say, we're working across every single government department, every arm's length body. We need to allow that flexibility to ensure we can tweak it as necessary to make it relevant and proportionate to the contract. But there's also a menu of model award criteria and sub-criteria too. So departments, the commercial teams will work with the budget owners, with the project owners, to identify the themes and outcomes that are right for their project and suited and relevant and proportionate. They will select the model question, always testing for relevance and proportionality, and then select the relevant award criteria from the menu of model sub-criteria that are in the tool. There's also a menu of standard reporting metrics, and note I've changed the language there. These are standard and we're aiming for those not to be changed wherever possible to provide that consistency that we mentioned before. But there are still a menu of options to allow for those many different markets in which we're operating. Now, all of these are shared and available on gov.uk already. As I say, they're a large little grid, if you like, of a menu of options. And so you can view those now. Your staff can review and start preparing for those now, exactly the same way that our staff can. But staff will select from those. They won't be including the whole model with each of your products, with each of your tenders. Now, I mentioned that there are a number of tools available. So I'm just going to share with you what is available right now for your staff to look at. It's quite considerable. So if you search on gov.uk for Procurement Policy Note 0620, this is what you'll find, the usual format covering all government procurement policies. And this first document is the rule book, if you like. So this sets out all the key requirements, the thresholds, which organisations are in scope, etc. So you can always look there for that. There's also a summary of the tool that I mentioned. So you can see there are the themes, the policy outcomes, and the high level quality criteria, award criteria. So that's the first document. The second is the actual tool itself. This is the most detailed version of the tool, the second document here. And what you'll find is a background on each of those priorities and why it's a priority. Links into the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. So after all of these requirements will be helping contribute to the UN Sustainable Development Goals, and the UK is committed to those 17 global goals. You'll also see some indicators where you're most likely to see this outcome being used. That's not a hard and fast rule that says this is the only way and case where this can be used. It just gives an indication to our staff and yourselves of where it's most likely to be used. So just get some guidance there. You'll then see the model question and the award criteria, the high level award criteria, and you'll see that we number each of those because further down you will see the sub-criteria. So for every high-level award criteria, you'll see more detailed criteria. And you'll also see illustrative examples. We're aiming not to be specific about requirements to allow that flexibility for different types of organisations to do something that works within their organisation. These are provided to illustrate and build understanding. So you see some examples of that on screen there. So that's the model itself. Those are the criteria, etc. The next document down is the guide to using the social value model. And pilots were held, a number of teams were using the early versions of the model and provided a lot of feedback and key questions that are answered in here. There's lots of detail, really practical guidance on how this tool is going to be implemented, how to select criteria. And further down, you'll see that there was also a step-by-step guide to how the tool will be used at different stages of the procurement cycle. So a very practical document there, and I'd urge your staff to be reading that one. When you're more familiar with the tool and the approach, this final document is essentially a more visual representation of that grid that I mentioned earlier. So it's a summary of all the themes, the questions, the award criteria, and the reporting metrics all side by side. A very practical working level document. So that's a summary of the materials that are available and the approach that we are using. So I'm just going to quickly now run through the themes that are in the model. So first of all, we have COVID-19 recovery, helping local communities to manage and recover from the impact of COVID-19. You can see there how flexible the tool is. That was added, of course, last year. And next we have tackling economic inequality, creating new businesses, new jobs, new skills, and increasing supply chain resilience and capacity. How are you developing your market? Are there opportunities to diversify your markets? What market development activities will you be performing? Those sorts of questions are contained within there. What jobs and skills opportunities are there for those furthest from the job market, for example? Next, we've got fighting climate change. If there's a key requirement in the specification for the environment, that will be handled through much more complex, detailed questions, as you would imagine. The teams won't be using the social value question to evaluate climate to that extent. This is for where we're looking for additional environmental benefits in this particular case. The next theme is equal opportunity. And the outcomes there are reducing the disability employment gap and tackling workforce inequality. And that includes modern slavery as well. And if you're concerned about any sort of duplication, well, the team very much worked with policy leads right across government to ensure there is that compatibility, that consistency. And the lead for modern slavery in the Home Office worked with the team to develop the criteria that are in this aspect of the model, for example. The final theme is well-being, and the outcomes there are improving health and well-being and improving community integration. So some of the things that actually could be very relevant in the criteria, in the tenders that are coming your way in the future, could well be around community integration, co-designing solutions with the community. Those sorts of features are covered in there. And of course, in health and well-being, that's covering mental as well as physical health as well. And you'll see some features of that covered in the COVID-19 as well. Okay, so just in summary then, what we have here is a tool that is there to enable greater supply chain diversity, shouldn't be creating barriers to participation for public contracts for SMEs or VCSEs. It will be is aiming to deliver benefits for our communities. It's embedding best practice in a way that's embedding in existing processes and has enabled us to build capability in commercial teams. In fact, around 3,000 staff have now completed an online training for social value. And then there's an optional, more detailed training that we run for staff to really looking at how they can roll that out and embed it and maximise social value in their organisations. And around over 1,400 staff have now completed that too. And you'll find there's that clear, consistent approach right across government through use of the tool, as I say, your staff can start using right away. So all of that information is on gov.uk. So I'll probably end there. Hopefully that is a good way of setting the scene for your sessions today. And I'll hand over back to Andy.
Thanks very much for that, Samantha, and thanks for running through, just what the government is actually doing in this area. I've just got a couple of questions actually, just to sort of throw at you, if I may, and also just to say, apologise to our audience. I think you went off camera and we didn't see any slides just for the last bit of your presentation, so apologies for that. These things happen. We're in a live Zoom environment, so that's a situation there. Clearly, the government's got a really comprehensive approach there, and there's a lot of stuff to actually take in. Obviously, one of the things that the government we know is keen to do, particularly in a post-COVID environment, is to encourage smaller businesses to actually get government work, because obviously the vast majority of businesses in this country, and indeed in the construction and infrastructure sector, are smaller enterprises. How can we guarantee that smaller organisations, given all of that stuff that they've got to go through, how can we ensure that they're not discouraged to tender for government contracts despite having to go through all of that? Is that something you can reflect on? Is there any training being given? You mentioned the training for for government, and that's fantastic to hear. Is there any parallel training being given to potential contractors in that?
Well, I think we've been working very closely with representative bodies right across sectors, and that's why I'm pleased to come and speak today, to raise awareness of what we're doing. And that actually the rationale behind this is to value the additional value that lots of organisations bring, whatever size they are, whichever sort of structure they're in, but particularly, of course, small and medium-sized enterprises and VCSEs can bring to the picture. And we've worked with, for example, the Federation of Small Businesses, and have run an awareness session with them, and we're planning to do more with them too, to raise awareness. But we're really calling out to organisations such as the supplier representative bodies and yourselves, really to help raise awareness. And that's why it's great to see events like this springing up right across all different sectors now, to help spread awareness. Of course, there are lots of materials there. I wouldn't be frightened off by the detail. The detail is very practical. It's very much sort of responding to frequently asked questions, really. I think you'll find that there's also, when you look at something like the grid, what staff are finding is it's doing the thinking centrally for them. It's doing a lot of the pre-work in terms of sort of ideas. It's raising awareness of what each of those outcomes is really talking about. If you say, what's included, what could count. That's really the spirit of what's in those models. So I wouldn't be frightened off by the detail that's in there. Very, very practical guidance, and that's the sort of feedback we've really got from staff and suppliers around that it's helpful rather than this kind of, it's not really there to be like a burden. It's there to be as helpful as possible.
That's great. Thanks very much indeed for that, Samantha, and thanks for coming this morning and highlighting the massive amount of information as well that's available for organisations, contractors, consultants to tap into that wish to work with the government on government contracts. So I really appreciate you spending the time to be with us this morning, and I'm sure that our I was going to call them readers, but today they're watchers and listeners. Basically, I'm sure that they can go onto the government website and find out more information, and obviously touch base with the relevant people within the government organisations to make sure that they're fully appraised on what they need to do. But Samantha Butler, thanks very much indeed for your time this morning. Really appreciate it. Thanks very much indeed.
Thanks,
our audience,
have a good day.
And thanks very much, and you as well. People will see that the panelists for our first panel are actually entering the room slowly but surely. So I'm just going to give them a couple of minutes to be all in the room. Before I do, just to remind people that if they do have any questions for any of our panelists, then please, please do post that question or questions in the chat. If you want to put your company or organization name down there as well, I'm happy to give you a shout out as far as that's concerned as well. Anyway, we're more or less on track for time. There's bound to be a slight little bit of slippage. We're dealing with a live environment. We've got 2 panels and 10 panelists all told. Just to remind our audience that we're about to start our first panel discussion, which is going to be looking at social value, and I'll introduce our panelists in turn before they speak in a moment. Then after we've had this panel and the Q&A session, so there'll be questions coming in from the floor and elsewhere that I will put to our panelists. We then have our second panel discussion, which is on delivering social value on construction projects. But first up, we've got our first panel discussion, which is on social value. What is it? We know that it's been increasingly talked about. We've heard from Samantha earlier that the government is placing a massive store on social value. But what is it? Does it mean different things to different people? Does the government truly know what social value is? How do we measure it? Should we measure it? Just what do we need to be aware of on this particular issue? We know that more and more clients are asking for contractors and consultants to demonstrate social value, but how do we actually do that? And also, how do we measure it? Hopefully this session will look at what we mean by social value, hopefully cut through some of the jargon, because every industry, as we know, in the construction and infrastructure sector has got its own jargon, but let's try and cut through some of that. So I'd make an early appeal for our speakers to try not to use any I nearly said anachronisms there, acronyms, and if you do, spell them out, just so that our audience can be fully informed as far as that is concerned. So without further ado, we'll get underway with this particular panel. And our first speaker, in fact, just to explain before we continue, we've got 4 speakers, 4 panelists in this panel discussion. We've got Catherine Manning from Social Value UK. We've got Natalie Kropp, who's the Sustainability Director for Tony G and Partners, and also played a key role as the technical lead on value definition for the Construction Innovation Hub. More on that later. Ali Kennedy, who is a board director at the communications consultancy BECG and our strategic partners for all of our infrastructure intelligence live events. And last but not least, by no means least, we have Professor of Construction Procurement at the University of Salford, Peter Mcdermott. But first up, we've got Catherine Manning, who is the interim CEO at Social Value UK. And Social Value UK is the UK body for social value and impact management professionals. And it has a particular expertise, and Catherine has a particular expertise on social value assurance and accreditation and organisational capacity building. At Social Value UK, Catherine has an involvement, apart from running the organisation as interim CEO, she's also involved with managing the development of some of the key services of the organisation, particularly the social value practitioner pathway and also the social value management certificate. And today she'll be talking about the role of Social Value UK, for those that aren't aware of it, and also accreditation, accountability, culture, and I'm sure a lot more besides. Catherine, the floor is yours.
If I can unmute myself first. Wow, thank you. Thank you so much, Andy. I'm a bit bowled over by that introduction. It's a great pleasure to be here with you all, and fantastic to see so many people interested in social value and how to action that within the built environment, within construction and with infrastructure. I think it's a really important question to start with on what is social value. I think there's been probably something that a lot of people have seen. There's been a recent UK GBC social value framework published, and I thought, interestingly, at the very back of that there were 23 different definitions of social value listed, and I think that's a good example to show that there's still a wide variety of understandings of what social value is. So we would certainly say, as a starting point, it's really important for organisations to have that discussion openly and not have that presumption of what it is that people think social value is, so that you can come to that collective understanding and then put things in place to work towards improving and managing your social value. So from a Social Value UK perspective, when we're talking about social value, we're talking about people's lives and the changes that people experience in their lives, both good and bad, positive and negative, intended and unintended, through engaging with the different activities and services that all of us would be delivering and engaging with throughout all of our lives. And those changes, we would talk about that being sort of aspects of changes to our overall well-being, which is also probably another term that we could spend the entire conference just talking about, and what does that actually mean. So there's lots of different things that would be encapsulated under that, perhaps things around material well-being like food, shelter, the physical environment, or relational well-being, through connections with other people, governance, how we understand our own identity, and subjective well-being. So, how do we actually feel about our lives? And I think that subjective word is a really important thing to note, because we're talking about value here, social value, and that is subjective. All value and all understandings of value are subjective, and that's really then sort of underpins into my next point. What is it that Social Value UK are advocating for? And we've got some of our members on the line here, so it'd be surprised to hear me mentioning that we're advocating for the implementation of the social value principles as the underlying building blocks for us being able to understand, measure, manage, and account and be accountable for that wider sense of value, or that wider definition of value. And very much at the core and centre of that is principle number 1, involving stakeholders. So we're talking about that subjectivity again, of understanding the value of the changes to people's lives from the perspective of the people who are actually understanding or experiencing that change. So it's their value that we're understanding. So as one of our members says a lot, value is in the eye of the stakeholder. So it's really, really important to talk to people and to listen to them and to be valuing things from their perspective. So from a Social Value UK perspective, we're not advocating for or arguing for one particular set of metrics. We're advocating for the application of this set of principles underpinning all of the work and the action that we do around social value. And sort of underpinning those principles are 2 basic propositions. So one of them is about for social value, we're not aiming to just understand the social value that we're creating so that we can prove how much we've created. We're trying to understand that both good and bad, to be able to use that to do better. This is about continuous improvement, and we talk about maximizing the value that we can create through the activities that we're doing or the resources that we've got available. So not just proving it so that we can make it bigger and say, well, let's do it again, but looking at that and saying, well, how can we use this to continuously improve and actually change our decision makings about what we do? And underpinning that is this accountability piece that Andy Andy had sort of highlighted right at the beginning, you know, underpinning all of this is that we're talking about the value to people's lives, and we should be continuously aiming to be accountable to those people for the effects that we're having on their lives. So I think that so at the heart of that, the principles are an accountability framework. We're going to keep on picking up on that, because I think as everybody here will be knowing, you know, you'll know that there's a growing emphasis on social value, and that's gaining a position in larger and longer term contracts. Now that means that there's a bigger effect that these social value decisions or claims will be having on the allocation of resources and the activities that are being done over a longer period of time. So that means there is a greater and growing need for confidence and verification and accountability for those social value claims. So I would argue that there's a growing need for assurance and accreditation for our social value movement, and really to make sure that there's a check that there's the substance to the value claims that are being put in place. I think my final point there is that for all of that to take place, we are going to have to think about our own mindset and our own culture for ourselves and within our organisations. You know, that we must be willing to listen to stakeholders and be willing to change what we're doing. And really, you know, if we look at the growth in inequality and the environmental challenges that we're facing in this country and globally, it's hugely dependent on that and our willingness to change our mindset and to change the way that we're doing things. I'll stop there, Andy.
Thanks very much indeed for that, Catherine. When our four panelists have spoken, we'll have a Q&A session, and I've already got a number of questions coming in the chat, so please keep posting your questions in the chat box, and we will get to those in due course. I think just before bringing in our next speaker, when we were looking at this conference and pulling it together, for me, construction and infrastructure, you know, can't produce anything without providing social value, because at the end of the day, everything this industry does affects people's lives. You know, whether it's a transport project, whether it's a local authority building project, whether it's a housing project, whether it's a placemaking project, clearly they have a key impact on people's lives. And therefore, for me, social value is absolutely embedded and an integral part of what the construction and infrastructure or industry does on a daily basis. And I think, you know, it's really important that we actually stress that, because sometimes, you know, in parts of the media that don't really, I think, understand the sector, it sometimes gets a bad rep, you know, in relation to a number of things. Of course, at the same time, our industry needs to communicate itself better, so there is a two-way process on that as well. Anyway, our next speaker is the Sustainability Director from Tony G and Partners, Natalie Kropp. Natalie, as well as having that role with Tony G, is also the chair of the Sustainability Group at the Association for Consultancy and Engineering, the business association for engineering and other consultants within the construction and infrastructure sector. She was also technical lead for part of the Value Toolkit project with the Construction Innovation Hub, which formed a key part of the construction playbook. And I think it's fair to say that, driven by the government's sort of desires in this area, there's been a lot of work that's actually been going on in relation to the industry and really getting into how we demonstrate social value. Natalie was obviously intimately involved in that work. She is an expert in sustainability and environmental issues, and in my opinion is often seen as a go-to person in the industry on net zero matters. I know she's a real enthusiast for social value and the environment in particular, and she'll be talking today about how the Value Toolkit is driving better social, environmental and economic outcomes through value-based decision making. Natalie, over to you.
Thanks, Andy. Again, a fantastic intro, and I'm feeling slightly overwhelmed with with what you said there, but I'll do my best to live up to it. As you say, I've been the technical lead for the part of the Value Toolkit development with the Construction Innovation Hub, which is a direct response to government call for better value-based decision making and delivering better outcomes. Whilst I'm leading that group, I have been very well supported by a whole wealth of industry experts, and Social Value UK included. And I'll talk a little bit about how we've brought them together to develop something by industry for industry as well. So the Toolkit project that I've been working on is about delivering better outcomes overall through better value-based decision making. So it's about improving what we build and deliver, but also how we do it within the built environment. And I kind of correct myself a little bit there, because whilst building things is a large part of what we do, and the majority of what we do, sometimes the solution isn't to build something. Sometimes the right solution is to do nothing, or perhaps change the way that we operate. So I think the Value Toolkit does start at that initial point of trying to understand what is the need that we're trying to meet here, and that's the need of society or the need of the client that we're trying to resolve, whether it's a problem, and working forward from there in terms of what we value, why we value it, and how we build it into our decision making. So it's not necessarily always about the construction. So as I say, it's to be applied across the whole investment life cycle of a project, programme or portfolio. We've also got some organisations looking at applying the process for their organisational kind of setup to see how they make decisions as an organisation as well. And in doing that, we're starting at that need stage, as I say, taking it all the way through your optioneering, your design, your construction, and into operation through to the end of life. So what we want to have is this sort of bedrock of value that we've understood for this particular asset or need that we're giving a solution to, having that to live through the life of the asset as well, and to inform the decisions that happen along the way. I think we'll probably all be familiar with the idea of value being eroded through a project life cycle, and that's something that the Value Toolkit is designed to try and resolve and prevent from happening. The way that we frame what we talk about with value is based on a 4 capitals model. So this is our way of organising and consistently articulating what we mean by value for a scheme. It follows a capitals coalition approach and model that's been well consulted on internationally. It's starting to come through in processes in governments, industry and financial institutions as well. And I think it sets us up quite nicely going forward for a general move towards a broader capitals considerations in our decision making. So that's social value being part of it. And as Samantha mentioned, social value has some elements of climate change in there, but there are also other environmental pieces to consider. And in the 4 capitals model, we also have a produced element. So we would consider the money and the physical asset on par with all of the other pieces as well. So the 4 capitals that we've got are human capital, social capital, natural, and then produced. And we have developed what we're calling a value definition framework, which defines what we mean by those capitals, but also what they mean in the built environment. So, for example, social capital in the built environment refers to influence and consultation, equality and diversity, networks and connections, and the changes that people experience in those areas as a result of the built asset. So, as Catherine says, it's all about the change that people experience. Social and human capitals are split out within our framework, and social is more about the networks and groups and the community effects, whereas the human is more about the individual. So we'll be thinking about skills, physical and mental health, experience even, how somebody feels about the asset as well. So trying to kind of, whilst we recognise that they're very well connected and linked, they are slightly different ways of looking at what we mean by change for people. So to try and help kind of put some flesh around that, we've got 17 categories of value within those different capitals, and they've been developed by our group of what we're terming relevant authorities, and they're groups of industry experts that they've been working with. So Social Value UK, as I mentioned, has been one of them, but we've also had the CIOB, RICS, REBA, and the UK GBC. So their social value framework is very well aligned with the way that the Value Toolkit approaches things as well, and follows very similar principles. The social value model that Samantha was referring to earlier, we have being a government funded programme of work and really focused primarily initially at least on government contracts and working with all of the major departments, the toolkit is very much for use by public sector as well, but a private sector as well rather, but our initial start has been public sector. Obviously within that we needed to be very conscious of all of the other policy changes that have been happening within government, the construction playbook being one of them, but the social value model being another significant one. So there's a very close mapping between all of the different measurements and metrics and outcomes that the social value model has identified as being important to our value definition framework as well. So they're very well aligned, and we can absolutely kind of report the two consistently between them. The process that we've got, just to kind of flag that it's not just about defining value in terms of this the 4 capitals approach. There's 4 different elements to the actual toolkit. It's a combination of processes, tools and guidance, and the 4 elements are very much integrated. So within each kind of decision phase of your life cycle, you'd be doing activities within each of these that would need to come together. So defining what you mean by value, taking policy and stakeholder views that are relevant to you and bringing them through to a meaningful expression of outcomes that you want to achieve on this project. So what's within your sphere of influence, bringing it down to that sort of level. We then have measurement and evaluation, which applies those appropriate metrics to those outcomes with targets and performance ranges. And by doing that, we can then bring things down to what we call a value index, but it's a points-based system. So where we've got apples and elephants that we're trying to combine, it means that we can actually bring it together to be able to compare options, be that in a design sense, but also in a tender evaluation sense. And then we have a client approach. And I mentioned a bit about this risk of value erosion through the life of a project. Having the right client approach, delivery model and commercial strategy, as well as the right mature approach to risk that covers all of these different risks around the value that we're trying to deliver, means that we can kind of build it into the commercial process as well, and how we go about delivering these projects on a more sort of management level. So the idea of social value, or any value that we're trying to create, isn't something off to one side. It's very much embedded in the whole process for delivering the project or program. So that's kind of an overview of the value toolkit. Yeah, as I say, we've been working very closely with Social Value UK and others to make sure that social value is well represented and brought in and aligned with what we're trying to do.
Thanks very much indeed, Natalie, for that. There's quite a number of questions coming through, and I've got them all written down and noted. So we're guaranteed a good discussion in the Q&A. So we'll move on to our next panelist, which is Ali Kennedy, who is a board director at the Communications and Public Affairs Consultancy, BECG. Ali's got wide expertise across the planning, communications, political advocacy, stakeholder and community engagement sector, and he's got wide experience of working within our sector, including advising organisations like Highways England and the Department for Transport. And he's also got experience working in the land and property sector, and also in the political sphere as well. It'd be interesting to get some insights from Ali as well about how social value is seen by the decision makers, the people who are pulling, the people who have the purse strings on this issue as well. He sits on the main board at BECG, and he'll be talking to us today about the opportunities and challenges around social value for organisations in our sector, but also the key role that communications can play in pushing the social value agenda successfully. Ali, over to you.
Great, thanks for that introduction, Andy, and those kind words. Just before I launch in, I'll just mention that I've been having some connection issues so far. So if I freeze at some point and you all have to deal with some kind of horrific freeze frame, I can only apologise in advance, but hopefully we're good to go. So as I say, thanks for the introduction. I think it's great that we've got views from across different disciplines and sectors on the panel. And when looking at social value, I'm really coming at this from a communications perspective, as you've said. So just to give a bit of background, the organisation I work for, BECG, deals with the communications side of projects across the construction, infrastructure, energy sectors, and a whole host of range from lobbies to government departments. But our role with each of them really is to help them navigate their communications challenges and to engage effectively with all their stakeholders, including local communities, politicians, the third sector, and so on. So for us, social value is increasingly a key strand of what we do. And as a communications agency, regardless of the type of project or client we might be working with, I think we're quite fortunate actually to find ourselves right at the centre and interface between communities, construction companies, local authorities and other stakeholders. And that gives us quite a unique perspective really on the opportunities and some of the challenges around social value, and an opportunity to try and join up those approaches for different groups through the work we're doing. So to give an example of that, many of our clients on the infrastructure side are particularly interested in how they can start building social value into their approach to projects early in the process, so that by the time you reach the stage where a project's consented to move to construction, there are clear plans in place and the connections with the voluntary sector, community groups and so on have been established, so that you can achieve maximum impact on the ground in kind of activating social value initiatives. So as with many other sectors, when we look at the construction industry specifically with regards to social value, it feels to me like the whole thing's still on a bit of a journey. And in some ways, I suppose the fact we're having this conversation and discussion on a panel titled "What is Social Value?" shows where we are on that journey. But that said, I think the opportunities to improve people's understanding of social value and realise the potential to deliver more impactful outcomes on projects are absolutely massive as a result, and I think that's a real opportunity. So one of the questions that was posed in the programme for this event that I just wanted to focus in on a little bit is what can we actually do to ensure that infrastructure is maximising all the opportunities available to it in terms of leaving a positive social legacy for the communities in which we work. And I think for me, the answer to that obviously is complex in some ways, but also in some ways fairly simple. And it probably breaks down into 4 key areas, some of which I've touched on already. So the first of those is education, and that's about bringing the industry and key stakeholders on the journey so that they understand the opportunities and crucially don't see any future requirements around social value as a burden or just some kind of hurdles to clear, if you like. So I think it's crucial organisations see social value as an opportunity and something that can work with their own commercial objectives rather than something that's in conflict with those. And this point is something I was discussing with Catherine just last week actually, and I think there's a big opportunity and role for the communications industry there to act as advocates and really help push the social value agenda forward successfully. The second point is around making social value a common thread throughout the life cycle of a project and making sure that the social impact and future legacy of projects is right at the core of how a project's conceived, and then taking that approach through all the subsequent stages in terms of how it's planned, designed, and ultimately then delivered. And procurement obviously plays a key role in that process along the way. And just on that point around procurement, I think the Crown Commercial Services guidance on this point is a really good example of that being really strong and nice and clear. The third point is around a mixed approach to measurement being needed. So yes, it needs to be specific, tangible, measurable, but it also needs to be impactful, put people at the centre and not drift into the territory of kind of pure number crunching. And ultimately, as one of our other panellists later today is fond of saying, and I agree with him for the most part, it's about outcomes, not outputs. But to take that step further, I think really it's about outcomes and outputs, and a blended approach to how we measure social value is important. And that needs to feed into the way we talk about social value and how we assess it. And then the last point, and I suppose I would say this as the comms expert on the panel, but communication and communicating why social value is important, how it can change lives, what a particular project will or has achieved, and why all that represents a win-win for all the stakeholders involved. I think that's really important. And as I mentioned earlier, comms agencies in this sector are always going to find themselves at that interface between different stakeholders with regards to social value. So I think they've got a key role to play in joining those strands together, as well as shouting about where this has been done successfully. So to sum up, I think there are plenty of reasons to be really optimistic and positive about the future of social value and its relationship with construction and development. But navigating some of the issues I've mentioned here does represent some challenges as well as massive opportunities, and successfully tackling those is going to be really important in driving the social value agenda forward. That's it from me. I'll shut up now.
Thanks very much for that, Ali, and just apologies for any of the Wi-Fi issues there. I'm sure we got the vast majority of what Ali was talking about, and obviously the role of communications as well. And there's some questions in the chat which I'll put to Ali a little bit later on that as well. Our next speaker is Peter Mcdermott, who is the Professor of Construction Procurement at the University of Salford, which has a fantastic reputation, in my opinion, in the construction sector. I've worked with a number of people who are alumni of that august institution, and it's always impressed me that they've always had a sort of a wider view of stuff, a wider view beyond just the industry itself. And I'm sure for those who've been fortunate enough to be taught and tutored by Peter, that's probably due in no small measure to his input as far as that's concerned. He's actually been a Professor of Construction Management and Procurement in the School of the Built Environment at the University of Salford since 2007, having joined the organisation as a lecturer in 1993. Sorry to make you feel less young than what you are by saying that. And I know that he's passionate.
I was 12 when I joined, yes.
I know he's passionate about our industry, and not just in relation to its outputs, but also the way in which it actually organises itself as well. And I know equally he's also passionate about how the industry makes a difference, how the built environment sector makes a difference to the communities that it serves. And he'll be talking today about a range of issues in relation to social value, including as well why it isn't just enough to measure it as well. But I'm not going to steal any of his thunder because I couldn't even hope to do that. So Peter, the floor's yours.
Thank you, Andy. Like all the other speakers, no pressure then with that build-up. Thank you very much. I'm delighted to be here. And it's my privilege, Andy. I'm just changing what I was about to say. In the months leading up to Christmas, October, November, December, it's my privilege to be teaching a master's module in procurement to full-timers and distance learners. Now, for certainly the faces I can see here and many in the room will know that in October, November, December, you like to keep things up to date. But in October, November, December, on top of Grenfell and Carillion, we had Brexit, and then we've got the Value Toolkit, which I'm delighted we've had a small part to play in through ACE and Construction Excellence. The Construction Playbook was on its way. There's public procurement notes on social value. So it's just live and it's happening. So I said to Andy today, what I would try to do is just put a quick overview on this and just say we can learn about implementing social value from elsewhere, from other domains where there's been an overriding social, economic or environmental imperative. And that's what we have done. I'll touch upon that. A few propositions from what we've learned and from our research, but the applied work that we do. And we've heard it so far today that where is a strong mission for social value, that will lead to more successful implementation. And we've got to find that mission sometimes. The potential to generate and improve social value isn't the same on all projects, programs or frameworks. Simple point about aggregating or leveraging in order to improve social value. And we shouldn't forget that if we are advocating social value to different clients. We've heard from Samantha on the national government client, but how does this play out in the wider public sector and local authorities, and how does it play out into private sector? I'll also then quickly say something about provocation. I know the search for lowest possible price isn't compatible with successful delivery of social value. And the final point that you've mentioned, I'll try to say something about, is we have a mini industry in measuring social value at the moment and defining those metrics, but that's not sufficient. It's the follow through now that needs to change, I think. So just a few words about where and how have we learned about implementing social value. Now, there's nothing new under the sun, is there? The idea of policy through procurement, even in the UK over the past 10 to 15, 20 years, is quite embedded. But in the early days of this, we learned from colleagues in the New South Africa as the New South Africa was born post-apartheid, that the traditional construction and infrastructure sector, populated by traditional quantity surveyors, had to, use the word, pivot overnight almost to through the reconstruction and development programs to use procurement power to include those communities that have been previously excluded. Where did they learn from? They'd learned from the affirmative action in the United States in the 60s and 70s. So this idea of policy through procurement has been there. It's been there as a soft thing within the UK, but in areas where there has been that overriding social economic imperative, we can learn from them. Some of our own PhD researchers have worked in this space in Malaysia, and I'll probably get this pronunciation incorrect, but in Malaysia, they had affirmative action procurement policy to include the formerly excluded Bumiputera populations. More recently, anyone who's working in oil and gas sectors will be aware that there's the Local Content Acts in many countries, including Nigeria, and Local Content Act requiring procurement to drive local uses and technology transfer. So there's nothing new under the sun there. And that's where we have done a lot of our learning. And indeed, I think we can see that coming through in Samantha's work. Next point for me is, Andy, just to answer your one about, I'm going to be talking about the procurement decision. And the work that Natalie and others are leading on for this value toolkit is an opportunity to fill that gap between the high-level policy goal and somebody making a procurement decision. And that value toolkit, the 4 capitals that Natalie has put forward there, is a big step forward in that. That's why I was so excited to be a small part of it. But Andrew, you raised the other point, which is about if not the procurement decision, the investment decision and investment in construction and infrastructure. Just as an aside, we do have a new green book, and that green book is allowing for levelling up. The new green book, the Treasury guidelines, is talking specifically about social, economic, and environment. So that's my obsession is with procurement, but the investment decision, the green book, we shouldn't forget that one. Samantha's given us a really great update on the Social Value Act, and I was delighted when the Social Value Act landed. It gave us a nice, simple definition, but she's reminded us that that definition wasn't just social value, it was social, economic, and environmental benefits to the local areas. So it's always been that broad umbrella term. And the 2 things she's reminded us about is that it's moved away from just being about services in policy. It is now goods, works, and services. And there isn't just a requirement to consider social value, but that evaluation. So there's major significant changes recently. So it does depend on what clients we're working with. We're seeing major changes there in national government clients. Just think about the wider public sector and local authorities. Local authorities, quite usually it's good to work with them because they do have that mission. One local authority we've been working with recently made it explicit. So social values should be easier, where they say our mission is to look for relevant and additional social, environmental, and economic value from everything that we do, including the purchasing power of the local pound. So of course, any of us should be able to get in there and help them to deliver that. But what about those clients? Colleges, private sector clients who might not have that overall strength of mission. That's where social value comes that little bit more difficult, and we have to work harder on it. This particular local authority, and this will answer one of the questions I think in the chat, and that particular local authority recognises that in its expenditure, where it is the direct client, where they are fully funding the work, they can have that direct influence in social value. You've got a weaker influence though, where there is it's commercially funded on council owned land, but you've still got that leverage. You've got some leverage where it is a joint venture kind of organisation with the private sector. And to answer one of the questions in the chat, what about where the projects are commercially funded on privately owned land? Then there's the planning legislation, the Section 106. So there's all kinds of leverages that can be brought in there. So from our broader work, we can also then see that there's the potential to generate and improve social value isn't the same on all projects, programs or frameworks. Leverage is important. Aggregating the power of the pound is important. And local context, and many of the people on here are really grinding out how we can understand the local communities and so on. But the major point I'd like to emphasise there is procurement. Procurement does matter. We're seeing big changes in national government procurement, but even after Grenfell, even after Carillion, in 2018, the government look at this through the House of Commons said, aggressive risk transfer and the search for the lowest possible price at the expense of value typifies public and private sector procurement, even after all of those things. So the search for lowest possible price won't deliver that wider social value. We have to get the procurement strategy right. Lots of great work going on in the value toolkit through ACE and Constructing Excellence, and some of that is around that procurement decision, but it's also, I think it was Natalie who emphasised that importance of social value at every stage of the development process. But there's still that tendency to throw things like other risks over the fence to contractors. I'm delighted to see the work that's going on as part of the value toolkit, which is looking at the business model for consultants. And if consultants are still paid on a traditional model of hourly rates, how are we going to get them to engage in social value? If they are still being charged with delivering a lowest capital cost project, we've still got to look at how we engage in consultants. And finally, just that point around metrics and measurement. When we are looking at the risks of delivering projects, we still tend to look at the risk of cost and time. But now we need to be building in, and I think the toolkit are doing this, the risks of not delivering these other outcomes that require the risk of not delivering social value. One of the issues that we do have now, and there's a couple of questions in there, is about the ownership of the social value data and ownership of the social value models. And measurement isn't action. We need to follow through on that. I'll rest my case there, Andy, so we can have some debate.
Great, thanks very much indeed for that, Peter. I think it's really interesting to hear you speak on this, and it's really interesting that we've actually got this issue now that I think at long last is front and centre of our industry. And I'm going to kick off with a question. Notwithstanding the fact that construction and infrastructure is so key to people's lives, and as I said earlier, it does have an impact on people's lives in everything that it does. How come it's taken so long for social value to become mainstream, despite the fact that the industry does actually make such a difference on that? And if I can put that question first of all to Natalie, why do you think it's taken so long? Or maybe it hasn't and we just haven't spoken about it.
I think from what we've been looking at in the value toolkit, and I'm sure Peter will have a comment around the procurement end of this, but I think there does seem to be a bit of a disconnect between the early sort of needs generation and the idea of why we have this project, why are we doing what we do at these concept stages, and that's where we're answering the biggest social need that is requiring this scheme to go ahead, be it a connection between London and Birmingham by train or any other major infrastructure project. why are we doing that? Having that discussion early on, but the reasoning behind that and the values that are set up at that stage and the purpose of the project at that stage not necessarily being filtered through to the point where we're actually delivering it. So when you come to the point that you're procuring your contractors to build the asset for you, we've kind of lost something along the way as to what was the point in the first place and what are we trying to deliver here. And then the social value becomes another bolt-on at that point to be delivered in a slightly different way for the local communities that are affected by the works almost. And it seems to be a disconnect at that point.
Thanks, Natalie. Put that question slightly differently to Catherine. Why do you think it is that maybe our sector has been a little bit slow in basically putting this issue front and center? Any observations for that from someone who maybe isn't directly involved in the sector, but obviously is very much involved in the wider social value environment?
Yeah, no, that's a good question, definitely. I suppose our network's been around for about 12 years, sort of shouting about the importance of people's lives in our decision making. I'd say that the biggest challenge, right? It's a challenge that we've still all got. It's financial primacy. So companies and organizations have the ability to be able to be extremely successful based on financial value creation above all else. So when are we going to get to the point that environmental value and environmental cost, social value and social cost are actually included in the ability for organizations to be successful? So we need to have this wider conversation about what does success actually look like, and if it's okay for organizations to be extremely extractive and be successful. I would add, sort of on top of that, I'm coming from my social value network, so the all the people that I'm speaking to, and the people here on the line today are all people who do care about these issues. So I would say there are some really good examples of action that's been taken through the construction industry over the last number of years. So that there is good practice and people sort of pioneering the social value movement going forwards as well. So I do think there's a critical need and a growing and huge inequalities that we're seeing here in environmental harm. So I wonder also if it's the visibility of those needs that's actually forcing people to take more notice of the action that's needed, because it's not just being critical for those that have little or no power. It's becoming obviously critical for all of those with increasing amounts of decision-making power as well.
Peter, you've been working in this area for quite some time. Why do you think it is that maybe it's taken so long?
2 points, I think, Andy. First one is if you plant this back in the academic literature says worldwide that there is a policy gap. It's not just the UK, it's not just construction. Once an investment decision is made, translating that all the way through to implementation through procurement is a difficult task for everybody. So I think it's a general issue, and if you like, that's where there's still a gap in knowledge. Taking that into the construction sector, now we are the original gig economy. We've still got that risk transfer mentality going through the supply chain. All of the initiatives we've heard about today are about trying to arrest that a little, and getting that when the risk is transferred over to a party, you're transferring it to the person most able to take that risk. If we pursue, and there's some questions in the chat there, if we pursue traditional procurement as the driver, that's what has shaped the industry that we've had. All of these initiatives are trying to reshape the industry. And it's not just, there's less chat here going on, but elsewhere in the working groups, it's if procurement is changing. Actually, there are one or two questions there about how we're used to about how contractors need to change their business models, less so around how consultants can change their business models to influence this. So it is that tradition of risk transfer, and the risk with social value is that you still do the same. You just transfer it down to the person least able to deliver it.
Thanks very much for that, Peter. One for Ali here as well. I think it's linked to this issue in terms of how, basically promoting the value that the industry actually provides and demonstrates. Do you think we communicate well enough around this particular issue as a sector? Ali's slightly frozen, so I might put that question to Natalie instead, who I'm sure has got a view on this anyway. Natalie, do you think we could communicate better the benefits of what we actually produce?
Yeah, absolutely. I think we could. And I think that, like I say, where you have this disconnect, I completely agree with what Catherine was saying, as well as Peter, about the transfer of risk and the cost elements. We tend to talk a lot about our delivering something within this budget or to this timescale, but we don't talk about really what the human stories are about what we've delivered for who and what difference has it made to them. And we're not, I'm a civil engineer myself, and civil engineers aren't necessarily the best storytellers, but social value is about people and stories, and we quite like to kind of boil it down to pounds or money or number of hours of doing a thing, but actually it's really about what difference that has made to a human being, to a person's life. And I think maybe the need to bring in better communication around storytelling and people and that human factor is something that we're not necessarily naturally good at within the sector, but could improve.
I mean, just on that as well, I mean, I don't know whether, Catherine, you've actually seen any examples, and we're going to discuss later on some direct examples of what our industry has done in terms of social value itself. But there's a question in the chat about, whether or not you think, and there's scope for construction organisations to be working more with the charitable sector and maybe the third sector and voluntary sector in relation to social value. Do you have a view on that?
Yeah. I'd sort of add to Natalie's point there. I think communications about the human stories is so vital, and that's what the numbers actually mean behind the social value. They're not numbers in and of themselves; they're descriptions of the visibility of the value in people's lives. And somebody else, or people have been saying, the built environment has a direct effect on all of our lives all of the time. And we sort of seem, for those that are able to sort of articulate that and sort of show, this is what we've done, and this is the effect that it's had on these people within our community and our own staff down our supply chain. It's really exciting. You could say, wow, what I'm doing, I'm going in and doing my job, and this is brilliant. I'm actually having this wonderful effect on people's lives because of, and I'm able to make these small changes to be able to make that better. And yes, so and I picked up that point in the chat as well, that there is growing interaction between the private sector and the community or voluntary community and social enterprise sectors. There's been good examples of that for a number of years. I know Waits have had a direct sort of commitment to doing that and increasing their amount of supply chain spend with social enterprises for a number of years. I know there's a multitude of other organisations that are committing to doing that too. It's been highlighted as hugely important through the PPN that Samantha was talking about, and the Transforming Public Sector Procurement Green paper that came out recently. And I'd say for being able to deliver better value for communities, for people, and then having that cross-sectoral collaboration is absolutely imperative, right? We're not all experts in everything. So if we're wanting to understand the needs of local communities, we need to talk to local communities. We need to talk to those that are working directly with local communities. And that's another thing that's been massively highlighted throughout the last year of crisis that we've seen. Local communities are doing so much to be able to support and to assist all of their own communities to be able to survive through crises. And so that sort of collaboration where private, public and civil society work together, that's where we can deliver most value for those in need.
Ali's back, but he's not on screen, but I'm going to ask him this question anyway, and that again is on communications and how the industry actually communicates this stuff, because obviously one of the benefits in relation to social value, I guess, is explaining some of the negative outcomes of projects or mitigating some of the negative outcomes of projects. What role has communications got to play in that, Ali? And also, how can we make sure that we're communicating these benefits right at the outset?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. Apologies, not getting much help from the internet connection at this end today. But on that first point, I think the industry is already, I think, making huge efforts to communicate around social value. And I think it was Catherine that mentioned it earlier. Everyone on this call is obviously engaged and interested in the subject, and there's real momentum there. And it feels to me as though the industry is in a position where it needs to really try and build on that and capitalize on it. And I think there are big opportunities for communications professionals to have involvement through partnering with the likes of Social Value UK and others to advocate for the social value cause, if you like, and to really sort of educate bits of the industry that are less on board or less aware of some of the issues around that and some of the opportunities. So that's something that we're going to be very heavily involved in over the next 12 months or so with Social Value UK in particular. And I think on that question about negative impacts and the role of communication in helping manage those, I think the answer really is about the role of communication in unlocking some of those issues early through constructive dialogue with stakeholders, communities, others, that might find themselves on the wrong end of those negative impacts, so that issues can be properly understood and built into how a project's developed, and also then explained and communicated to the communities and people that it will affect. So I think it's a kind of critical element of all this, and I think whilst the industry's done a good job and is very proactive in communicating around social value, I think there's more that can be done around that to bring others on board, and that's something that we're really keen to focus on in our work going forwards as well.
Thanks, Ali. Just got a sort of a final roundup question for all of our panelists, and I'm going to kick it off with Catherine, if I may. Organisations out there that want to find out, maybe look at a really good repository of information, on the issue of social value. Where would you, apart from Social Value UK, of course, where would you direct them to?
Oh, well, you've stolen my answer away there. I was going to say, come and look at our website. We've got lots of things in our social value library. I mean, the other things I would point to as well are things that have been mentioned on this call. So I think the work of the Value Toolkit, particularly for the construction industry, is hugely important and a great place to look. I'd mentioned the UK GBC social value framework that had been that's recently been published, and if people haven't looked at that yet, I'd really recommend it. It's really digestible and a great place to start. I think there's some other probably key documents or things that have been coming out recently that are probably important to be aware of, and one of them's the British Standards Institute Guide for Enhancing Social Value. So I think this is a really important step for the movement, and the clues in the title there about enhancing social value. So this is about management of social value over time. Yes, so I think that those are probably some key places that I would look to. We've got a whole vast array of different partners on our website as well, some of whom are on this call with us today, who all have varying different expertise around social value. I think there's been a few other social value banks and experts mentioned in the chat themselves. So HACT have been working in social value, and particularly in the housing sector, for many years, and there's the National Social Value Task Force that many people will be aware of, working in public sector procurement particularly. So yeah, there's lots of work going on there too. Hopefully that's enough.
Thanks very much for that, Catherine. Natalie, just in terms of some of the work that you've been doing in terms of the Value Toolkit, how do people connect into that? How do they get involved in that?
So our website for the if you look for the Construction Innovation Hub and Value Toolkit, you'll be able to get to our website, and there's currently on there a nice kind of interactive graphic that takes you through the steps of the process that we're developing, and there's also under the value section there's a link to our value definition framework. So that's the best place to go and look. We've got in terms of our development phase, we're kind of rapidly at this crunch time coming to a launch in late April, which will be our kind of testing launch. So we'll have a period of kind of advanced users that will be early adopters that will be using the toolkit to test what we've developed, how it works over the few months over the summer and autumn, with a view that the main thing will be launched towards the end of the year. So there's plenty of ways to get involved. If you sign up to our website, you'll get the information to know when you can sign up to be interested to be a tester or get engaged with it in other ways.
Thanks very much, Peter. Any pearls of wisdom from you in terms of really great places to go for info?
At the moment, the big initiative, of course, is Construction and Innovation Hub, which has got the UKRI monies to drive this. So, first port of call to be on top of what's happening this initiative, just as Natalie's outlined there. I think most people on the call will be a member of one institution or other who are all supporting the Construction Innovation Hub. So your own, we've been working with ACE and Construction Excellence, but all of the other Seeker and so on have all got a place on there. Just in tips of finding material, an exercise that we did recently, we were trying to bring all of the different disciplines in the room up to speed, and it was very, very easy to find a guidance for that estate director from their professional body. It was very, very easy to find for the accountant in the room, the social value. So if people always think they can't do it, they're usually a member of a body that has issued a report that says that they can. And so Google is an easy way for that. Final tip is, a lot of people don't use Google Scholar. If you do want to get one step deeper, just Google Scholar and then put your usual search terms in, and that'll take you directly to primary sources rather than the secondary sources. Google Scholar. Cheers.
Excellent. I didn't know about that even as a journalist, and perhaps I should have done. So that's a great takeaway on a number of different levels. Finally, Ali, just as far as you must have to look up this stuff all the time working with your clients, briefly, your advice to to people in the room about where they should go. Are you aware of any great places?
Yeah, thanks, Andy. So I think the fact that the question's being asked, does highlight the need for people to have access to the various resources that have been mentioned. And something that we're looking at to support the communication side of this is launching a series of campaigns, some of which will be targeted at industry, some of which will be targeted at local government and elsewhere, to pull some of that together and point them to those resources where they can access information together with a series of kind of thought leadership pieces with different leaders from those different sectors and audiences. So nothing to add over and above what's been mentioned in terms of where you can look, but I think that point around needing to draw all of that together and make it as easy as possible, really, for people to become more engaged, access that information, that's a really key point. And something that we're having a close look at going forward. So that's all I'd add on that point.
Thanks very much, Ali, for that. And we're just about to move into our next session. But just before we do, that's the next session where we're going to hear from construction and infrastructure organisations about some practical examples of what they've been doing in relation to social value. Just to say that it's clear there's a number of issues here coming up that require further sort of discussion and development, really. And one of the things that we're going to be doing going forward at Infrastructure Intelligence is producing a social value supplement, a digital magazine, if you like, special supplement on this particular issue, because we know it's something that is extremely important, not just to the industry, but to society as a whole. And we want to use that to take a further deep dive into the issue, and also, though, to showcase some of the excellent work that's actually going on in the industry, and also to showcase some of the excellent sources of information. We heard about that earlier on with our first speaker, Samantha Butler, in terms of what the government's doing. And we do want to sort of raise the profile of all of that stuff. So if you are interested in contributing to that, then, you know, do email us at Infrastructure Intelligence. The email address is all over our website, and it's easy to get in touch with us. As I say, our next session is about to start. I just want to thank all of our panelists in our first session: Catherine Manning, Natalie Kropp, Ali Kennedy, and Peter Mcdermott, for their inputs into this first session. I think it's really been hopefully you know, very informative and insightful for everyone in the audience, and we really appreciate you giving up your Friday morning to help us at this event. So thank you very much indeed. You know, for your input this morning. If I can just also as well, and I can see them all in the waiting room at the moment, if I can ask our next crop, no pun intended, of panelists to basically switch their cameras on, and we can get you moved into the room, and obviously ask our existing or previous panelists to turn their cameras off. But thank you very much for all your input. As I said earlier, our next session is one where we're going to hear, you know, from the. I better be careful what I say. I will call it the coal face, if you like, for one, because I'm from the north. I'm from Durham. Not that we have any coal mines left up here anymore, but nevertheless, that's what I'm going to call it. We're going to hear from practitioners on the ground who are actually demonstrating significant social value in what they're doing, either through their work or through the organizations that they're involved with. And we've got a range of speakers in this session, from the HS2 joint venture, from social value organization Sea Bridge, from Atkins, from the brilliant Class of Your Own, which I'll speak more about later, from Pagabo and the Social Profit Calculator, and also from Jacobs. But as I said, this session is all about demonstrating social value, what the industry is actually doing to show real social value in action. And our first speaker is a speaker who we've actually got on video, because sadly she wasn't able to join us this morning. So we actually did a video with her earlier, a bit like the Oscars, really, although we're not giving her a prize. And that's Louise Daly, who's head of legacy at the Costain Skanska HS2 joint venture. And Louise was very closely involved in a lot of the works that demonstrate some real social value benefits on the HS2 project, and was involved in delivering an award-winning program of high-quality programs which supported local employment, economic growth, and community cohesion. And she's going to talk a little bit on video about the project that she was involved in and how that made a real difference to local people in the local area around HS2. So if you can just bear with me for a second, then I will basically call Louise up and you'll hear from her on video. Just give me 1 second. Just give me 1 minute and we'll be there. Just a slight few technical problems here, but we'll get there. Just give us 1 second. Actually, just before we actually do that, slight change of plan, because I'm just having a bit of difficulty getting Louise on the screen. So we'll actually kick off with a different speaker at this point, and that will be Wesley Ankra, who is the Managing Director of Seabridge. And Wesley is a social value advocate and a specialist advisor serving communities and clients in the built environment, in the built natural environment. Wesley's a founder and managing director of Seabridge and is very much involved in working with organisations in our sector on social value. And I'm sure his insights are going to be very interesting indeed. Wesley, over to you.
Thank you, Andy. And I think obviously this session's about best practice. And I think for me, in terms of my role as a consultant, best practice starts at the procurement stage, at the bid and tender stage. And that's where we're finding a lot of our work of our clients is becoming very effective at the moment. I think ultimately, how do you achieve best practice? How do you work out the best levels of social value for delivery? It's research, it's understanding the communities, it's understanding the environments, it's understanding the issues that are basically facing and the challenges of the people that you're looking to work with and support. So ultimately, in terms of what we do, we like to go out and actually conduct an audit of an area. We like to kind of look at all the local policy drivers and understand what it is the local authority are looking for or the procuring body are looking for in terms of the value that they want to see delivered on the back of a contract. But also, actually, that's not the only part of the story here. What are all the local organisations needing? Because actually, off the back of what's been an horrendous 12 months for most people in the community, there's going to be some massive holes around deprivation, education, health and well-being. And actually, the amount of money that government are putting in for levelling up around infrastructure projects across the country, this opportunity provides us with a great chance now to actually, provide benefits and values across the whole country off what is quite simply a procurement model that has existed for years. And I think the tools the government are bringing in around the social value model, I think what Peter and everyone's mentioned earlier, Natalie's mentioned about the valuation toolkit, gives us all these amazing tools to do it. But ultimately, what we need to do is make sure the delivery is coming through at the back end. And that's why what we do in terms of best practice is so important, is to make sure that we are giving our clients the kind of realistic goals of delivery and how they can do it, which is where the tools that government are coming out of are so useful. Because ultimately, as was mentioned by Samantha earlier, it doesn't matter if you're doing 50 apprenticeships or 100 apprenticeships. It's how you're doing them that matters, and how you're going to deliver and implement that as a plan that matters, which basically then brings in SMEs into the infrastructure and construction sector in terms of winning government contracts. And without that kind of guidance, they look at the big sort of tier 1, tier 2 companies they're competing against and actually think, what's the point? We can't have a piece of that pie. But ultimately, what you find with smaller organizations sometimes is a greater flexibility to be able to deliver on certain outcomes that large organizations can't. So it's about balance. This is about, in terms of best practice, what we are helping with our clients to do. So ultimately, I think what we need to kind of get into our heads a little bit here is that when we take a measurement approach to best practice, you're kind of constricting yourself in what you can do. So I always kind of run off a philosophy, and it comes from a guy called Tim Goodspeed, who taught me about social value and measurement quite a while ago now. And it's always to kind of, to be vaguely right is better than to be completely wrong. And what Tim basically means by that is that we cannot measure and capture every single output out there in terms of a metric. So therefore, let's capture what we can capture, but ultimately, let's still make sure we're doing the other stuff that we're not capturing, but still managing to somehow record it or report it in a way that doesn't maybe link itself directly to a metric, because that's the only way we can completely capture the needs of not just kind of the local community, but also local authorities or even kind of on a sort of central government level around the needs of deprivation and the needs of communities, but also economically, environmentally as well. So ultimately, that's kind of one of the first points I wanted to make on that front. And I think ultimately we need to kind of take the pressure off social value a little bit. And I think in terms of looking at what needs to be delivered and what needs to be embedded, there's a lot of pressure on achieving high numbers. And I think it's been alluded to earlier by other speakers, it's not just about the numbers. So actually, what we need to look at is, what's the project going to do? How long is the project going to be there for? And ultimately, in terms of setting out a kind of level of best practice around that, is then working out what stakeholders are going to be part of that journey. So if you're on a 20-year infrastructure project, you're going to see people that are, in primary school 1 minute and actually maybe working on the site 10, 15 years later? How can you maybe create value for those people across the whole journey of those people being stakeholders in that community? And that comes down to what is a primary principle of Social Value UK, but also mine and what I base my business on is, involve stakeholders, involve the individuals and involve the communities in your decision making. If you're not involving those people in your decision making around social value, how do you know you're creating the best value for those people? It's really simple in terms of me saying it, but actually you'd be surprised how much that's missed out on. Ultimately, now what's been great for social value is that the social value model is requiring a 10% minimum. So therefore, where maybe social value might have been 2.5% or 5% of a response in terms of a tender, and people sometimes overlooked it, it's 10% is not a level you can overlook anymore. So ultimately, it is quite difficult to work out what people are looking for, and it's been raised before, how are we measuring it? Are we using different toolkits? Are we using different models? But ultimately, that's irrelevant to what needs to be delivered. What needs to be delivered is what the people need and what the environment needs in terms of where these places are coming forward and the projects are coming forward. So it is about using consultants. It is about using people within your own supply chain that understand social value. So if you're a master planner, for example, make sure you're using architects that understand social value. Make sure you're using cost consultants that understand social value, landscaping, engineers, because if you're not using people that understand social value, you're not going to see a social value yield off the back of your good nature and good work in the first place. And all that's going to do is just drive better quality and better value, and actually just drive better options of people to work with in terms of generating and driving social value. So yeah, I think for me, looking at kind of what I do and the work we're doing with different kind of infrastructure companies, construction companies, developers, it's all about driving best practice, but driving better value for communities.
Great, thanks very much indeed for that, Wesley. And I think an important takeaway from what you were saying there as well was work with organisations that get it, work with organisations that know how to demonstrate this kind of stuff as well. So thanks very much for that. Just to say as well, if there's any questions for any of our panelists, please paste them in the chat and we'll get to them in a little while. I'm going to try and get Louise Daly back now, which all being well, we should be able to do using the methods of modern technology. So let me just try and share my screen, and hopefully she will be with us in a moment. So hopefully we should be able to get that. So if you just bear with me a second, then she'll be there in a moment. So just bear with me 1 second while I just try and get that at the moment. Just trying to find her at the minute. Just bear with me. No, we're still having a problem with that. So I'm going to move on to our next speaker. Apologies for that. I'm sure we'll get that in a minute, but there just seems to be a bit of a problem with it at the moment. So we'll come back to that in a second. But our next speaker is Vicky Hutchinson, who's the Environment Practice Director for Infrastructure UK and Europe at Atkins. She is someone who is passionate about creating value for communities through buildings and infrastructure, and also harnessing the power of social purpose for employee engagement and client and stakeholder value. And I know that she's someone who's extremely enthusiastic about how our sector and how our industry demonstrates social value. So Victoria, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Andy. So by way of introduction to me and my social value journey, it started about 8.5 years ago, and I worked for a contractor. I was a sustainability manager. And what I found was that clients, I did a lot of bidding, and clients never really asked us about our environmental performance on site. They seemed to assume that we could do that and we would do it well. But what they did ask us about was our impact on the community. And at the time, the asks were really varied, and some people just asked us to do something innovative with the community. And other asks were a lot more pointed, and they tended to be around employment and skills, and how we would get unemployed people into work, of course, do educational engagement, but also do things like ensure the completion of level 2 and level 3 apprenticeships during the project. Now, those apprenticeships would always have been in our supply chain. The bricklaying contractor might have been on site for about 3 weeks. So those sorts of asks proved a real challenge for us. We didn't know how to do it, and I built a small team and we cracked it, and then we figured out how to deliver that stuff at scale across a national business and deliver local impact for local communities wherever those projects were. So I really loved my time there, but I got really frustrated, and I was frustrated because I felt that there were opportunities for creating social value that were being missed because, for example, architects had specified materials that weren't local, so we couldn't place local contracts for those materials, and that decision had kind of been, that opportunity had been lost. So when I got an offer to move to Atkins, I realised that this was the opportunity I'd been looking for. So when I got to Atkins, I met another amazing group of people who were already doing really fantastic stuff in the space of social value. So, for example, there are economists who'd been working on local and regional economic growth plans for the areas around the stations along the route of HS2. And there are natural capital specialists who are working in the water sector to look at how changing land use can sequester carbon, create green infrastructure that protects against flooding, and create leisure and wellbeing value for the communities. And there are bunches of strategic planners that automatically consider how the communities that they are designing must deliver active travel, low carbon homes, green space, and economic opportunity. So we've got some fantastic evidence of how social value can be delivered. But at Atkins, we're going a step further, because I want to take issue with something you said earlier, if I may, Andy. I don't think that buildings and infrastructure in and of themselves necessarily create social value. I think that we have to make sure that we account for and maximise social value through the business case and through the planning and the design process. So we're doing this by working with clients to help them design their own social value frameworks and develop valuation techniques. That means social value can be incorporated into business case appraisal. We've developed our own Atkins social value protocol that sits underneath our social value policy. We've developed our own social value framework, and we're incorporating that into an update to our global design framework. So there's a reference point for incorporating sustainability, including net zero and social value, into all our designs. So that's a quick summary of where we're at, some of the evidence that we've got, and I really look forward to hearing from others on the panel about what they're doing.
Great, thanks very much indeed, Victoria, for that, and thanks for that correction as well. You know, I think I was letting my enthusiasm for the industry actually, you know, sort of get the better of me there. I do passionately believe that everything we do should actually provide, you know, social value, and because at the end of the day, if it isn't, then why are we doing it in the first place? But I'm also aware that you know, there can be instances where that might not be as clear as it needs to be. So I'm going to move to our next speaker and try and share the video at the end. And I think one of the most important things about social value is that we're actually enthusiastic about what we actually do in this area as well. And of all the people I've had the pleasure to meet in our industry, someone who's right up there in terms of enthusiasm and making things happen is our next speaker, Allison Watson, who's the Chief Executive of Class of Your Own Limited, who have been, well, they developed the Design, Engineer, Construct, the DEC program, which is, I think, revolutionizing training and development for aspiring people to work in our construction industry. And their programs, the programs of Class of Your Own, have been endorsed and supported by a growing number of highly respected specialists around the world. And I'm sure what Allison's going to talk about now hopefully will leave us inspired, but definitely will leave us informed as well. So Allison, the floor's yours.
What can I say, Andy? Oh, no pressure. I'm just so pleased actually that you kicked off with training and development, because that's been my bugbear for all these years. You know, we've always been classed, because we deal with school kids, we're always being classed as corporate social responsibility for years. I mean, it's why I gave up my job in the first place. So I'll put a bit of meat on the bones. I'll track back a little bit, because yeah, I do get a bit passionate to the point where you might have to switch me off, and that's fine. It's no problem. So what do we actually do? Well, actually, Andy, there's a really great statement on the infrastructure intelligence, education and skill hubs that pretty much defines why I established Class of Your Own well over a decade ago now. And that is, and I quote, "To safeguard its future, the construction sector needs to attract the best talent and invest in skills development to ensure that the industry is sustainable and can play its part in building a better Britain." And I think that really, I might even steal it for our next strapline, because as a former land surveyor myself, you know, and therefore an industry representative, you know, working on a major projects from 2004 onwards. That was the Building Schools for the Future programme. You know, I was working from the east end of London right up to the northeast, up in South Shields and everywhere in between. I was that girl who was thrust on stage with a theodolite just like this behind me, to talk about careers in construction. And as a quiet soul then, you wouldn't believe it now, my God, but as a quiet soul then, you know, to actually be thrust in front of 300 gawping little kids to try and inspire them about a career in the industry, when they were just really shuffled in, you know, talk for 20 minutes, tick a box for careers, tick a box for corporate social responsibility. Something about that whole practice felt very uncomfortable for me. And I think when Tony Ellender at Balfour Beatty rung me up one day and said, "Are you that woman who does student engagement?" I thought, oh my God, I don't know, am I? I clearly was, but I'm not sure how much we actually engaged students. So I gave up my job in 2008. It was a construction recession. It was the right time to do it. Or should I say, gave up my job finally at the end of 2009 when the phone stopped ringing. And created Design Engineer Construct as a learning program, as a specialist STEM subject that sits within a timetable all the way through a child's life from year 7 at age 11 right through to 18 years old. And it was really important that this program was academically focused, because we know damn well that, you know, schools at the moment are massively under cosh to meet performance tables, to meet targets, to hit the grades in a way that is not done in any other country in the world at 16 years old. So unless it was academically focused, it would never cut the mustard with head teachers and the unwieldy pressure that they're under. But the main thing for me, it was a program that helped people like me as a surveyor to really provide meaningful and tangible opportunities for you know, children and young people occupying the schools that we were building. And it was a major effort to make meeting social value requirements easy. I mean, social value should be easy. It shouldn't be something that we go to bed with and worry about. But more than anything, you know, the who, the what, the how, the when, the where, for people like me, but more importantly, the why are we in schools? Why do we do what we do? And that old, you know, Simon Sinek, start with why. It's never been more important than now. And I think over the last decade, you know, we've worked with some fantastic employers. I know Vicky from old, you know, and you know, many of whom still work with us, and indeed now have been on the receiving end of the talent that Design Engineer Construct has actually produced. I mean, I love the fact that AEW in Manchester rang me up just a couple of weeks ago and said, can we have another 2 DEC students, because they've made phenomenal architectural technologists at 16-year-old. How many kids know what architectural technology is? So big up for AEW. And Renica in Manchester have now got 10 of our students in construction project management, quantity surveying. You know, they just come in and go, you. They know what they're getting from a DEC student. And I think, you know, now that, you know, I think the COVID move to digital has presented with the industry with its greatest ever opportunity to rewrite the rules of community engagement. I mean, for me, you know, we should be capitalising on the opportunity that's presented to children in remote areas, coastal areas, rural areas, where we know, and the government backs this up, that there's a huge disparity of provision. And let's face it, if there's no construction going on locally, how do they see how fantastic we are as people? We've got to be seen to be believed. So the fact that digital's now enabled us to engage young people and the wider community, I mean, you know, adult lifelong learning, this is not just about kids that we work with. We can work with children anywhere in the country, and indeed we've just done a load of work with Scape, big up to Scape, you know, just enabling real project-based learning to take place where, you know, there's that profound education and skills opportunity offer that a major infrastructure project can provide. So we're working with our major projects with local authorities, with universities as a client, with Transport for London. We've got emerging opportunities with the NHS. We've got emerging opportunities with the Welsh School Building Programme. It's quite nice to be back there again. We didn't even know we'd won it. We'd been written into the bid without us knowing. But better still for me, we're putting education at the very starting point of projects. Instead, as we've alluded to earlier, we've had to wait for the contract to be awarded. So we're missing out on concept design. We're missing out on community engagement. We're missing out on planning. You know, our kids know what TPOs are. They know what, you know, what real client end user engagement looks like. And I think that's been one of my biggest frustrations over the years, having to wait to engage with schools, because after all, who are we trying to benefit? You know, we've got to engage early with schools. We don't just want to be bringing them in as a box ticking exercise when we're starting, you know, forgive me, knocking pegs in the ground and digging holes. So I think for me, you know, it's really refreshing that social value is now being driven by clients. It's been written into procurement. And the fact that we can now offer a co-designed, joined up approach that can have profound long-term impacts on educational achievement and indeed progression into the industry. And not just entry points into sort of more traditional technical and professional design, engineering, construction roles, but it's highlighting the careers of the future: renewable energy, electric vehicles, nature conservation and restoration, energy efficiency, carbon capture and storage. And if we take education seriously as an integral part of procurement and the social value toolkit that we all have actually in our back pockets, we can hit the triple bottom line every time. We can tackle climate change. We can support regional economic, local economic growth. We can improve health and well-being. We can improve community integration. But moreover, we can support the development of young people and the wider community into a really modern, fantastic built environment. I'll get off my soapbox. I'm sure there's more to come.
Thanks very much for that, Alison. I'm sure we'll return to some of those questions in the chat. I think we've now found a way, at long last, of actually hearing from Louise Daly, who's going to actually talk about the social value work that was done on the HS2 project. So I'm just going to hand over to my colleague who's behind the scenes, Chetna, who is actually going to basically share the screen and bring Louise in. So over to you, Chetna, to make that happen. Thanks.
Hi, and thank you for inviting me along to speak today about the High Speed 2 Enabling Works programme. Unfortunately, I can't be with you live, but I'm here doing this video for you to watch from the day. So High Speed 2 is more than just a transport project. It's an economic and social project too that will create a long-lasting social legacy for communities, young people and industries right across the country. The Area South Enabling Works programme is delivered by Costain and Skanska. And we're located in central London between Euston and West Ruislip. And that runs through 7 very different and very diverse boroughs, each with individual social priorities and concerns. The programme's in around its 4th year now and has been delivering some preparatory works for the construction of the High Speed 2 route. So leaving a positive and sustainable legacy was one of CSJV's key objectives, delivering economic growth and sustainable jobs for the communities living around our sites, with a clear vision to support those that were most vulnerable. But to do this, we knew we had to take a collaborative approach, and we couldn't do this on our own. we had to work with those people that lived and worked around the area. And it was essential to understand what the real grassroots issues were in each of those 7 boroughs to enable us to embed a strategy within the heart of our project that could deliver the most impact. By developing strong partnerships with key organisations to fully understand the needs of the community has been crucial to supporting our legacy programme. And together we have worked to find local solutions to support these as collaboratively as possible. So by working with small local charities and organisations that really understand the issues in each of our boroughs, we've collaboratively come together to find solutions to employing local people, supporting young people in their educational journey, housing and employing the homeless, and supporting local community projects. By bringing together the teams in CSJV that had any type of touch point with the community, along with our fantastic supply chain partners, we've ensured that no opportunities to support local people have been missed, including providing us the platform to build a better understanding of the project and the benefits a large infrastructure programme can bring to the local community. Demonstrating the value of our approach and outcomes was really becoming quite hard to quantify, and we were really keen to explore what methods of evaluating both the fundamental changes we were having on an individual's life and the value of our programme. So working with the social value portal, we decided to do a retrospective social value exercise to analyse the data that we'd already captured over the 3.5 years of delivery and quantify our programme in financial terms. The outcome of bringing together our local success with procurement, legacy, environment and wellbeing totaled £115.5 million. So with our total local value added around 26.9% of our total project spend. Our outcomes show that we delivered some significant outcomes to support the local supply chain and businesses to win high-speed 2 contracts, and around a share of 25% of contract value was awarded locally, and about 50% of that was in our most deprived areas. So alongside that, we've also employed around 450 local people, 200 previously unemployed, worked with around 11,000 young people on STEM, and delivered around 2,250 work placements to local students in need. So social value has been crucial for us to understand the impact and the value of our programme and to inform our stakeholders, our clients, and of course the community of the difference we've been working or making in the local area by working collaboratively with public, private and charity sectors. This approach has seen us deliver initiatives such as Buses for Homeless, a local enterprise who work with homeless people who we've given space to on our site. We've supported them with site setup, payment of utilities, training, and then ultimately jobs for their guests once they've completed the programme. And it's been really, really fantastic to hear some of the success stories coming out of Buses for Homeless, such as Kevin, who has gained the support for skills, his confidence, and he's now working with us on the High Speed 2 programme and had his first paycheck in over 3 years, and that was fantastic to watch. So following on from the success of the Enabling Works programme, CSJV became the founding member of Empowering Communities, which is the first industry-led social legacy initiative created and driven by contractors working on the construction of High Speed 2. This collaborative approach combines the knowledge, expertise, experience and passion of some major High Speed 2 employers such as Skanska, Costain, Strabag, Arup, Mace and Jagados, alongside High Speed 2 and Network Rail. So together we're supporting the needs of the communities living close to our sites, ensuring that we leave a legacy of employment, economic growth and skills for generations to come. Collaboration is key in driving social value outcomes for the communities we work within. By joining forces, we can deliver so much more. We can deliver innovative initiatives and outcomes much better than we could do individually, and setting a new standard on social value on major projects. Empowering Communities aims to utilise the skills, knowledge and passion and experience of all of its staff to work alongside local people, charities and borough councils to support these aims. We are not seeing ourselves as competitors anymore or doing this in isolation, but we're joining forces for the wider good. The good thing about this is the High Speed 2 programme has delivered us a platform to enable this way of working. And with the length of the programme, we are able to really build up some fantastic relationships, work really closely together to solve local problems and develop initiatives that support the most needy across all of our 7 boroughs.
Thanks very much indeed to a virtual Louise Daly for that explanation and some insights there about what they did on the HS2 project. Our next speaker is Gerard Topless, who is the executive chairman of the public sector procurement organisation Pagabo. He's also the CEO of the Social Profit Calculator, which provides consultancy and software around social value techniques, tools and services, and has actually in a relatively short space of time increased its influence in our industry. So Gerard, the floor is yours.
Thanks, Andy, and usual great session today. As usual, your team are doing a great job. So thanks for inviting me. Good morning, everybody. I'm Gerard Topless, as Andy has introduced me. I'm the exec chairman at Pagabo, Cypro, and I'm actually the exec chairman at SPC. We've brought in a new CEO actually very recently. Actually, Pagabo is a national leading framework agreement provider. We specialise in the built environment. Cypro is a leading NEC SaaS contract management and risk software provider, and is used across not just our contracts but also in the wider infrastructure arena. And Social Profit Calculator, we actually have a tool called Social Value Calculator for the company's SPC. And yeah, Andy's right, we are a leading social value consultancy and also a SaaS provider. We have actually produced a calculator, a way of actually measuring social value and community benefits, and we deliver that on a simple sort of software platform. What I'd just like to talk about is a little bit about how we're sort of reacting to the way the government has asked us to in terms of some of its procurement, and also really the decisions we made some years ago. You know, we were one of the first framework providers to take social value pretty seriously. We sort of reflect now the construction playbook, which was launched in December last year, and we believe that's going to evolve into a standard for our industry. All of our companies, Pagabo, Cypro, SPC, we're all embracing the construction playbook, and we're seeking to deliver innovation, digital adoption, SMEs, health and safety, well-being, skills and social value, you know, and the move from assessing on what's called MEAT to MAT, most economically advantageous tender, to most advantageous tender, we think could be quite fundamental to this. And that could really help and move in that sort of sector away from price, you know, moving away from from upfront cost to whole life cost. So we really do embrace that. As I said, we were the first framework provider to really integrate social value into our frameworks, and we are way above the 10% level that a lot of people still use. And we include 20% social value into our quality decisions for our new frameworks, and that has really been quite an interesting sort of development for us. We support the complete integration of social value into procurement. The outcome is that our suppliers on our frameworks buy into this directly and indirectly through themselves and also through their supply chains. And our suppliers get it and they demonstrate it. We actually measure the impact of the contracts we enable, and we publish the data on our website every month. And today, I can sort of share with you that we're from over £2 billion of projects that we have enabled, and using social profits, social value tools, we can demonstrate that our suppliers have enabled £3.4 billion of social value within these projects. So if I just sort of break that down a little bit for you, apprenticeships, we've delivered 944 apprentices, 3,500 new jobs, workforce productivity, or measured as GVA, just over 1.2 billion. They've safeguarded 14,500 jobs, that's an important factor to consider as well. Work placements, over 1,000 work placements, and the LM3, which is the sort of benefit to local communities, we can calculate we've had a benefit on our projects of 1.6 billion. So that is real sort of tangible sort of measurement for us. We're developing a new platform ourselves, MyPagabo, which is really, is going to be at the heart of what we do, and it will be putting social value considerations at the front of the process. And by using social profit calculators tools, we will be adding new monitoring and evaluation tools which provide that more practical element. Forecasting social value has been around for some time, but actually demonstrating what you have done and those outcomes and being able to monitor and evaluate is extremely important. So we are providing tools now that allow us to do that, and also to provide assurance. So the actual outcomes are really, really solid and validated. And I think that's probably more important, because practical examples are actually better than sort of monetized proxies, really. We're building simple dashboards and KPIs now for our supply chains, and they have to actually provide that information to us, so we can demonstrate really what has been achieved, and more importantly, demonstrate what will be achieved, but more importantly, what has been achieved. We also have an initiative called the Future of Construction, TFOC. We've got quite a lot of our supply chain directly and indirectly involved in that. We've also a lot of our clients. We're focusing on 5 things really: skills, learning, health and safety, and well-being, regulation, innovation, sustainability. And it's about trying to do things to align ourselves with the future worker, the future workplace. And social value and sustainability is very, very important to that. We've already launched some new qualifications around for the future of construction, which a number of our organisations in our sort of ecosystem are using. And we're about to launch some new on-site management tools. Social profit calculator is really it's a very simple and affordable tool to help clients and supply chains understand and manage their own social value credentials and requirements. We've been working in the past sort of 18 months with Innovate UK and a number of partners led by the Department for Transport on what they call a Living Lab. A Living Lab is a big sort of test base. There's about 20 partners involved. It's a £17 million project, and we have obviously a small part in that, but we're looking to develop an infrastructure or an MMC calculator for infrastructure, and that's going to be used hopefully by people like TfL, Highways England, to actually start to understand the social value component and linking that to modern methods in infrastructure investments. We're now seeing more and more investment companies come to the fore. Companies which are inquiring to have a look at our tools. We think this will be a growth area. If you think about planning, if you're a large supermarket and you're looking to put a planning permission in an area, social value is a real tool to help you with that process, but also demonstrate to the local community the impact of that development in your area. We're finding private equity and funders changing their investment decisions now, and looking particularly around sustainability and net zero carbon. So really, whole life value, we're looking at that. We include a lot of that that the CLC have been working on, the Construction Innovation Hub, and what to me is common sense: upfront value versus whole life costs. You should always buy in whole life costs. That's been a decision that has followed my business line for 20 plus years, and I think now is the time we can actually move into that. And I think final point is really social value will help us emerge from this pandemic stronger and better. I think it will be more aligned to the future worker. The future workers will have a different view of the world, and they'll want to work differently. I think Alison has mentioned that already on this sort of call. And the future workplace will be a different place. But what we must do is actually leverage what we do in our sector, and we must try and make our sector attractive to new entrants. And when they come and work in our sector, we never really want to let them leave, because if you leave our sector and go and work somewhere else, a bricklayer wants to be a marketing person, we must provide that opportunity in our sector, because if we don't, they will leave, and 95% of people who leave our sector never come back. So we must try and do that. So using social value will help us post-pandemic. It will help us build a stronger sector, and I think it will also help with levelling up and the skills agenda that the government have. So they're my sort of comments, Andy.
Thanks very much, Jared, for that, and a timely reminder as well at the end about keeping people in the sector, which I hope is part of demonstrating that the sector actually does provide real value to citizens and to local communities. Our final speaker in this panel is Leighton Cardwell, who is the city's director for Jacobs in Leeds. He's responsible for Jacobs' work in the city and the wider region, but of course he's part of Jacobs' wider national and international network, who provide some absolutely fantastic work and fantastic projects that are delivering real value to people across the country. So Leighton, the floor is yours.
That's great. Thank you, Andy, and it's an absolute pleasure to be here today. I think, as you know, as we're very much aware, the UK has one of the most unequal societies in the developed world. And if we're to truly level up, we need to think really carefully about the wider social outcomes we want from our infrastructure investments. So the political, economic and business culture needs to focus on outcomes of our projects, and solutions that you've heard from others tackle the wider community issues rather than just project outputs. So as you've sort of highlighted, Andy, at Jacobs, we're delivering major infrastructure programs that benefit communities, our cities and the economy. And as you've heard earlier, we think that a government-led strategy for social value is really vital. The recent procurement policy note launches a new model to deliver social value through its commercial activities. And as other speakers have said, we're seeing a growing market shift towards understanding the importance of taking that kind of comprehensive and holistic approach to embedding social value in programs that really is end-to-end. We think that the creation of the new National Infrastructure Bank, for example, will also play a role in supporting new technologies, help reduce uncertainties, and to accelerate the funding and delivery of projects. But if we get it right, it can also then achieve greater acceleration and delivery of those inclusively and really valued social outcomes too. But in that process, we need to be really careful to consider how we design and integrate infrastructure so that it's place-based and that it has that kind of long-term benefit for all. And some of our work, for example, on some of the major Transforming Cities programs, for example, in and around Preston or across Lancashire, or some of the towns deals that we might be working on around the Tees Valley, are really testament to this. I think that kind of brings me then to a sort of second, perhaps slightly more wider point, that we need to have a greater focus on some of the knowledge and skills actually needed to deliver social value. So training for some of our industry leaders, practitioners, and decision makers could really revolutionize some of the thinking behind projects and developments. So we're helping our clients put business cases together that really drive that end-to-end social value solution and making that people and wider holistic case for transformational investments. And part of that has got to be about guiding the supply chain so that everyone understands how to embed, measure and deliver social value. So, for example, if we look at Network Rail, we're identifying and delivering social value from investments on the Transpennine route upgrade between York and Manchester. And at one level, that's going to deliver longer, faster and more reliable trains. And for anyone in the north of England, I know that's really needed. But itself, it isn't enough. And a standardized approach to social value sometimes means that that real local need is not always met or understood. And the opportunities to drive that social value are therefore sometimes missed. So on Transpennine route upgrade, we wanted to move away from a sort of a traditional client-contractor relationship where targets can simply be kind of cascaded through the supply chain along with some of the risks and some event potentially any penalties as well. But instead to have a slightly different approach where we've helped provide advice, guidance and training across Network Rail and the wider supply chain to help the delivery of collaborative social value. We've worked with Alliance delivery partners to help widen the supply chain and upskill teams, make sure that everyone's on board with the same social value principles and all working in a consistent way to actually understand what the whole team means by social value and therefore how to maximise delivery. And that's really important because we've delivered over £500,000 worth of social value, even at the really relatively early stages of the project, before it's even moved any further. If I move south for a moment, we're supporting Tideway, which some of you will know are the company responsible for building the big super sewer in London. But they also have a really, really strong vision and objective around delivering wider benefits for community around the Thames and beyond. And working with Tideway and contractors on the programme, we developed an overarching framework for skills delivery and helped manage its implementation. So to date, we've had over 100 apprentices that have been recruited through the project. More than 25% of all employees on the project live in the local area, which is really important. And then in terms of net zero and wider sustainable solutions, there's innovative incentivisation targets around it that really help drive some of those. And this collaborative approach ensures that we've supported a whole range of different type of people get their foot on the project and get that kind of career path on the project that others have mentioned, particularly those from unemployed backgrounds and ex-offenders through some of the partnerships that we've developed. So perhaps drawing some of those things together just as a final observation, I think as Gerard was just alluding to, now is a real opportunity for change, and the pandemic has created a catalyst. But we need greater alignment in decision making and across different stakeholders, because these are complex projects with lots of different stakeholders. So I think a shared understanding of what social value is and across different industries and sectors is really vital. And that common approach to describing and measuring social value alongside the delivery frameworks, tools and methods is really key. At Jacobs and with our social value research partners, Symmetrica Jacobs, we're really embedding social value right at the early stages of projects and business case development and making sure that thread runs all the way through before construction. So it's got a whole life approach, and that we've got benefits that are thought about, captured and monetized, as part of that case for investment to make sure that we lock that whole life approach in.
Thanks very much for that, Leighton. And just to let our audience know that we will be probably just overrunning by around about 10 minutes or so. So apologies for that. I just want to start off with a question, and I'm going to throw it in. If I can ask all our panelists to be as brief as they possibly can so that we can get as much in as we possibly can. I know it's difficult, but I think one of the things I think our audience will find quite interesting is specific examples of where social value has actually enabled you as an organization, maybe to show even more value than maybe what people thought was in that particular project or initiative in the first place. I mean, is that something you can reflect on, Vicky, first of all, where the work of that you've been involved with has actually done that?
I think people who are kind of committed to delivering social value on projects will always find opportunities to deliver over the duration of the project. And in fact, often you have to. So if you're going to run a social value kind of plan or framework on a project, you start out with a set of deliverables that you've committed to and a range of stakeholders. And then the landscape shifts and people's priorities change, and that's inevitable. So I mean, some of the things that I've been involved in have been things like looking for opportunities for social enterprises to get involved in the project, that we didn't foresee at the outset, and some projects that have included ex-offenders or people who've been released on temporary license to come and supply catering for projects. And these things we hadn't anticipated at the start of the project, but once you get them going, you end up generating more social value than you'd anticipated at the outset.
Thanks very much from that. In your experience, Wesley, has that been something that you've seen on the projects that you've worked on, that sort of real added value that's come out maybe beyond what people thought about in the first place?
Yeah, it has. And I think the best way to give an answer here is an example actually of innovation around delivering social value. So I was working on a contract once with a larger construction company, and we were looking at local VCSE businesses we could bring into the supply chain. And one of the obvious wins for us was we found and identified a company called Clarity & Co, who basically makes sort of hand soaps and toiletry products. Rather than basically spend over a 5-year period, £10,000–15,000 worth on sort of soaps, maybe big company like Unilever that you might buy from your supermarket, whatever, we actually were thinking, look, why don't we buy from a smaller organisation? And it's going to cost us more. It's going to cost us probably 50% more because actually, you know, the price point is a lot higher because they're a BCSE, but also you're getting a better quality product as well for that matter. But ultimately, because this organization worked with disabled and blind people within their business and within their training mechanism, the level of social value we were delivering through that project was vastly more than the uplift in what you were basically paying in a bit of so. And when you're looking at a contract value of £110 million, the uplift is insignificant. So in terms of how projects I've worked on, it's taking that innovative approach to see who BCSE wide is in that community that you can engage with and ultimately spend through them and also bring them into some sort of consultation processes as well. So that's probably the best example I can give.
Thanks, Wesley. Alison, from your perspective, you know, how have you found organisations in our sector, their willingness to engage with you and then leverage the the good work that's actually being done, obviously first and foremost by your organisation, but obviously by them through working with you?
Yeah, I mean, it almost goes right back to the beginning, Andy. If you see this as training development, you'll get it. If you just see it as plain CSR and ticking a box, you never will. And I want our children to get jobs at the end of the day. That's got to be the ultimate outcome. But also we want our teachers trained, because if ever we needed a new breed of teachers as well, never mind future employees, we need that. And just for one example that springs to mind at the moment, I can remember having a meeting with Carillion years ago with the head of justice around, why are we still putting paintbrushes in the hands of prisoners, believing that that's all they can do. A lot of these people are in there for digital crimes. Why aren't we harnessing their aspirations there? So we actually, and it was wonderful to actually hear from a teacher who's working with a group of young lads, and I say they're lads because they are all lads up in Newcastle. That's got to change for a start. But he said, I don't want to give them the traditional built environment offer, forgive me, digging holes and painting walls. I want them to be digital. He himself has come from the automotive industry. He was leading the field for Audi and Mercedes. We went to Turner Townsend, who we've worked with for years, who have recruited our students. We went to them and said, this is going to be very, very different, but will you commit to supporting these kids who needed a different sort of chance? These kids are absolutely thriving. One of the lads came to me and said, Miss, is it all right if we embed a McDonald's restaurant in our classroom design? I went, yeah, absolutely. It's a learning environment, it's yours. And it's about creating social value. You see the opportunity and go, my goodness, let's get McDonald's involved. So now he's actually creating a McDonald's restaurant for McDonald's. The opportunities are there. We've got to grasp them. And I think we've got to, not be fearful of trying new things and taking a risk. And I think that's still the biggest blocker to organisations changing their approach to social value. They're old school, a little bit like BIM, old school, not going to move forward. Take a risk, because the value that you will actually achieve is profound.
Thanks, Alison. Gerard, you spoke earlier about the, in monetary terms, of social value that's been achieved, and that's obviously great. But is there anywhere where people can go and see through some of the stuff that you're involved with, either with the social profit calculator or Pagabo's work itself, where people can see demonstrable information and real projects about what's actually being delivered in a nutshell? Is there somewhere where people can see that?
Yeah, yeah, I suppose in simple terms, our supply chain, which Vicky's company is actually on our supply chain, Atkins. So we represent and actually sort of calculate and view all of the work that they do. So we could point to every project that actually finishes on site will have an element of social value legacy associated with that. Now, we work quite heavily in the education space, so there's an awful lot of work going on from all the contractors, Wilmots, Morgans, ISG, all of these organisations are working very closely as they develop their contracts, and they're on-site pre-construction, construction, post-construction, handover, that sort of stuff. They're actually doing an awful lot of work with students, with young people. So I can think of some of the projects we've done in London, which have been very, very challenging in terms of the environments they've been in, and there's lots and lots of examples of students coming in, taking on apprenticeships, and then developing a career from it. So everything we do has that sort of outcome towards it, and I think that's quite easy to see from that. The other thing we're doing is through our future construction piece, really. We're now working and trying to develop our own social value, which is what skills are required, how do we invest in skills. I mean, I probably want to talk to Alison offline about this, because we've developed sort of skills for the sector which are about trying to retain, and I'm so it's quite a big thing for me, this about, you know, people leaving the sector and people not actually sort of staying in it, because, you know, you might not know this, but there's about 40,000 young people attend FE colleges on construction qualifications each year, but only 10,000 stay in this sector. So, I mean, 75% of people don't stay in it. Well, you know, when you start to link the future of our sector, it's the careers, and actually understanding that there's a whole social value piece on there. And the qualifications we developed are about saying, well, okay, if you're a bricklayer today, you know, he or she who joins that, you might not want to be that in the future. So we developed a curriculum about for looking at entrepreneurship, for innovation, for working with people, digital, agile working from home, working on site, and all of that, and actually trying to educate people on that. And what that's doing is that's actually developing a different way for people to think. And that is really, you know, in my mind, is linked to a direct social value impact that we're trying to have using some of our own resources. And, you know, people like F&G are involved in that, Wilmot Dixon, Morgan St. I could go to Lindham's, small, medium and large, and they're all involved in that. We've actually launched it now, and we've got our first 25 25 young people, they're all young to me anyway, going through that in terms of our sector. And from that, we're then going to release it into the sector, into the industry. So there's examples from our supply chains, and there's also examples we're doing. And if people want to ring me and talk to me, please feel free to do that. Share my details.
Yeah, we'll certainly do that. And also, just for those in the chat where we don't get to all the questions, we will be doing and publishing a supplement on this issue of social value. So we'll do our level best to address those. Just before I finish off with a killer question, for the same killer question, which I hope will be answered briefly to all of our panelists, I just want to return to Leighton for a second. You're obviously based in the north, and there's a lot of talk, isn't there, at the minute from the government about this levelling up, which, I mean, you might tell from my accent, I'm a northerner, and sometimes there can be a little bit of cynicism about levelling up and what it really means. I mean, how do you view that in a social value context? Is there something there that we can leverage, if you like?
Yeah, so great question, Andy. I think for me, the acid test of that question and the question you asked previously is around what is our thinking around social value and our engagement doing to change the things that we're investing in and the schemes that we're then delivering. So I might take you to a little bit further north to one of our examples in Edinburgh recently, where we've been looking, commissioned by the council and wider group of stakeholders to relook and reimagine what Edinburgh city centre could be in terms of its transformation, and really getting that deep-rooted engagement and thinking about the real underlying issues that underpin the levelling up perspective means that we started then to develop a strategy that was looking at a range of different things around improved urban realm, improved health, well-being outcomes from the actual scheme. And it really shaped and led to a different set of activities and plans for the city that we then developed through that work. We're seeing it across some of the other Towns Deals and Transforming Cities programmes I mentioned in the north of England now as well, Andy. But taking that approach and actually then having the tools to value these things early on and make the case to decision makers that just because it's not benefiting the car doesn't mean it's not a good thing to do. And we've really got the evidence that we can go on with that to help support them is really key. And we're finding, for example, through that work, that the benefits on health, well-being, people's individual almost happiness of where they live is 3 to 4 times that of some of the traditional benefits of infrastructure alone. And that's the sort of case that we can make and start to change investment patterns and priorities to really focus on levelling up through that social value perspective.
Thanks, Leighton. Final question time. We've reached that point in the day, unfortunately. We're talking about social value here. The whole day's been about looking at social value. But why are we still talking about social value? Shouldn't it be already embedded in every project in construction? First up, Wesley, brief as you can on that.
Yes, it should be, but I think, look, let's be honest about social value. It is in its very early stages of development and adoption. we can't expect everyone just to jump on board and adopt something which is still evolving. So I think we have to be patient with it. We have to look at it in terms of it's still a set of assumptions, and hopefully over the next 10, 20 years, we'll have a good firm framework to all to work off.
Thanks, Wesley. Gerard, your view on that? Why we're still talking about it? Surely it should be part and parcel.
I think it is in our contracts, Andy. I'll be honest with you. We've been doing this for a couple of years. I think there is a sea change. People are making decisions based on that now, and I think as the public sector becomes educated more, and they're given the opportunity to actually think more freely and not think about cost, then I think they will do that. And I see it every day now in every contract that we award, and we award lots of contracts every day, as you probably imagine. Social value is a real thing. It's there. It just needs to continue to grow.
Thanks, Gerard. Alison, your view on that? Embedding it in everything that we do as an industry.
Yeah, we should have been doing it 20 years ago. Absolutely. And I think the issue is going to be, and I'm going to challenge Gerard somewhat slightly. I don't think it is being done as well as it could have been done. I think we're missing opportunities to do it really, really well and profoundly over the whole project life cycle. And I think a lot of that is until the politics of education and planning and construction is more joined up, we'll continue to marginalise those who probably need it most.
Thanks very much, Alison. And Leighton, your view on that? How do we make sure that it is embedded in everything that we do?
Yeah, I mean, the short answer, I think, to your question, Andy, was yes. There's definite improvements that we're seeing across the industry, and I think there's been some real step changes over the past few years. I agree entirely with Alison's sentiment. I think for us, it's less about the company and the brand name. It's more around our approach and wanting to be collaborative and making sure that we wrap our arms everyone who's involved in the project. It's a project and program-led piece. It's not about the individual companies. And I think taking that perspective really helps to shape some of that collaboration and can help continue some of those step changes going forward.
Thanks very much, Leighton, and thanks very much indeed to all of our panelists in both sessions for today. And I'm sure that the conversation and the collaboration and the discussion will actually continue. As I said, we'll be producing a social value supplement which will be taking a bit of a deep dive into this. And I've just noticed that Victoria has re-entered the room. So I'm going to give the last word to you, Vicky, about, surely, it should be embedded in everything that we do, shouldn't it? Social value?
Absolutely, yeah. Thanks for that, Andy. This is kind of one of the things that I want to share from today, really. Having a social value framework that guides what you do as an organisation, what your purpose is, and shapes how you deliver your services, whether they're public or private sector or in the community. That should be at the heart of everything we do, and that's the best way of driving maximum outcomes for those people in the community.
Thanks very much indeed. And I just noticed in the corner of my eye in the chat that someone raised the issue of the important role played by women in the social value agenda. I mean, of course, it shouldn't just be down, to women in particular to highlight this, but I think it's instructive, and particularly some of the panelists that we've had today who have been women, on this particular issue. And I think the industry needs to make sure that it uses all its talents across the piece when it's highlighting issues like social value. As I say, we've run out of time, as we always do on these occasions. Thanks very much indeed to all of our panelists. Keep an eye on our website, keep an eye on our social value hub, which will be packed with information from this event and also the whole social value area across our industry. A big thank you to everyone for taking part again. We'll be back in a month's time with another event, one of our webinars on another key issue for our industry, on diversity and inclusion. And we're looking forward to hopefully a very robust discussion on what the industry needs to do in that particular area as well. It just remains for me again to thank all of our panelists and to thank our partners, BECG, for their fantastic support for today's and all of our events. And we hope to see you again very, very soon at an Infrastructure Intelligence Live event. Have a great weekend, everybody. Stay safe, as we always say on these occasions, And before too long, hopefully not too long now, we'll be able to do this sort of thing in person. Thanks very much indeed, and have a great weekend, everybody. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks, everybody. Bye.